It's Query and Company.
I'm going to be keeping you company for the next few hours.
You are not going to believe the company.
This company.
You're going to bankrupt your mama's company?
At least I have the radio to keep me company.
On 93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
Jimmy, what is the most important thing to start any action-packed day? What is the first thing that you need to do if you're going to run the mini? You got to hydrate and you got to do what else to make sure that you are good for the day? What's the most important meal of the day?
Oh, got to have some breakfast, Jake.
That's right. You've got to start your day with the proper nutrients. You got to get going when you've got a full day ahead of you, right?
That is correct.
Now, I don't know if you know this or not, okay? But, well, first off, you did know this. You obviously knew that Lou Malnati's is the deal, right?
Oh, of course I knew that Lou Malnati's is the deal. One of my favorite pizzas ever, but one of my clear favorite of the Chicago deep dishes that are out there. Love some Lou Malnati's.
Now, here's the thing. National Deep Dish Pizza Day is tomorrow. First off, it should be National Deep Dish Pizza Day every day, right?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
But since we have a loaded show today, Eddie Garrison's been working tirelessly. If you think Eddie's head is big, literally, wait till you see the muscles on his shoulders from the carrying he's done in building this show today. Eddie, would you like to run down for me what we have on today's program?
So at 12:30, we have the second all-time leading scorer in Purdue basketball history in Rick Mount. At 1:30, Derek Whittenberg, as you are very well familiar with.
NC State.
Correct.
Hero, yep.
And then at 2 o'clock, Tony East to recap that abysmal performance last night from the Indiana Pacers.
And this leads into what's going to be a busy, and for you Purdue fans, take a deep breath right now. What time does Purdue tip on Saturday?
6:09 p.m.
So that means that we are now within 54 hours of Purdue playing a Final Four game. 44 years goes out the window in 54 hours. And we've got more to talk about with that in terms of a lot of Purdue guests tomorrow as well. But in celebration of that, to nourish ourselves for National Deep Dish Pizza Day, Lou Malnati's is perfect for this. Because Lou Malnati's has sponsored our numbers game for March Madness. And that means that Jimmy, for example, is sitting on Purdue. He's hoping that Purdue can deliver for him the grand prize, which is the big gift card from Lou Malnati's, as well as a Purdue hat. Right?
Not Jimmy Cook.
Listener Jimmy, just to clarify.
What did I say?
You said Jimmy.
Yeah,
broadly,
listener Jimmy.
Just
sorry.
to clarify.
Listener
for the audience,
Jimmy.
yeah.
Good Jimmy.
Good
Jimmy
is
Eggleston.
Yeah.
But we still have 4 teams alive. And Josh needs to claim his prize of the gift card for having North Carolina State, which is the double-digit seed that advanced the furthest. We also, of course, will give away the prize that right now Kansas City Steve is sitting on of largest blowout in the tournament. Longwood got beat by 40. So, I don't know, maybe Purdue beats Carolina State by 41. Derek Whittenberg's unhappy, but then Josh is happy because he gets 2 gift cards, not 1. But Lou Malnati's has right now, this is the, now Jimmy, did you already
It's
clean
gone.
yours
It's
out?
gone. Yeah, I still got some crosswalk.
We're supposed.
Can we get some
The
sound on
whole
this?
idea was that we would take a bite of this
Yeah,
on
I'm
the
selfish. You put pizza here. I got the butter crust though. I'll give you this.
air. Wow, you wasted no time on that.
No, I took it down.
Now this has the special drip, right?
It does.
Which is, by the way, the Lou Malnati's Mike Hot Honey Sauce. So I'm taking a bite of it right now, which is fabulous. Tomorrow, by the way, multiple Lou Malnati's locations for carryout. This is perfect also for your Purdue viewing party. You can get it from Avon, Greenwood, right across from Brebeuf High School on 86th Street. Then, of course, the dine-in location in Broderpool, which is the best. What's going on there, Eddie? Or Jimmy?
I'll just wipe the mouth. Just wipe the mouth a little bit. Gotta look good for the camera, Jake. You know how it is. Got plenty of napkins. Lou Malnati's took care of us across the board. You got the cup pepperonis, the sausage, the Mike's Hot Honey Drizzle. They also make the honey available in their thin crust and wings. I'm sure that's delicious on the Lou Malnati's wings. A little hot honey there.
See, I love it because that drizzle, it's just a little touch of spice. Not too much, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for talking while I was eating and allowing me to do that. Absolutely wonderful.
Not my first rodeo.
Pacers were bad last night. Pizza's great. Pacers were not, right?
No, they were not. One of those It's tough when you have injuries this late in the year or just a piece missing. And I know that shouldn't be the only pass that's given if there's any passes worth giving last night. But it felt like a game where if you would have had Miles Turner out there, I think the Pacers win. I'm not saying they win going away, but I felt like you could feel his absence at times. The offense also struggled across the board in this game outside of the first quarter where the defense really carried the day. They outscored the Nets 31-19, and it looks like maybe they're going to run away with this thing. Second quarter was putrid. Give up 42 to a Nets team that's basically all but given up. Late in this game, Pascal Siakam starts cooking. Looks like they're going to wind up, despite everything, walking out of Brooklyn with a win. And just 9-0 run, I think it was. Of course, happy to do it. What, 9-0 run, I think it was, Eddie, over the final, 2 minutes or so by the Nets to give them the edge, and then they wind up hanging on to win. So just frustrating in a lot of areas because these are games, doesn't matter if it's in November or if it's now, when you have a team that you're clearly better than and you're in the middle of a playoff race, you cannot afford to trip up. And now all of a sudden, I said this on Twitter last night, and looking closer at it, maybe this isn't fully the case, as in to say last night's loss might not have been a playoff killing loss, but boy, does it make your margin for error that much tighter in terms of where you're at. Even though the Heat still have more games to play than you do, it puts so much pressure on that matchup on Sunday at Gamebridge against Miami, assuming you take care of business against the Thunder and then you win the next couple of games after that. But every game this stretch, Jake, we talked about it yesterday, is a playoff game for the Pacers. It should be treated that way because you're fighting to get out of the play-in. If that is the case, that every game has been a playoff game, you might as well treat Sunday as a Game 7 against Miami because that could very well
it's a big
decide
one,
everything.
for sure. And I think yesterday or last night, the thing that, I guess troubling, I'll use that word, you want to get – the thing that's kind of frustrating about this Pacers team, Jimmy, is it does feel like if you look at great teams, and Indiana aspires to be a great team, I don't think anybody's pretending that Indiana is yet a great team. They've had great moments, right? But great teams have very few nights off. And when they do, there's usually plausible explanation for it. Travel issues, back-to-back, somebody's hurt. Michael Jordan was out gambling till 5 in the morning. When there are inexplicable games where you're like, how did the 70-win Bulls lose to the Nuggets in Denver? Well, I think we know that story. So there are usually some explanation for it. Good teams that are still trying to be great are still get trapped by 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that's where Indiana still is. And I think last night a big part of that was trying to find consistent offensive production outside of their big 2. Now, it's good if Halliburton is kind of clicking again, right? But you've got to get some stuff where you're back to the cohesiveness. Part of the magic of that run in December was their ability via Halliburton to facilitate, move the ball around, space things out, and just start rolling, right? And
you had pretty much a full-strength roster. Whereas
True.
It feels like this team is, I don't want to say so thin, but to your overall point of trying to find more scoring options, you add in a 15-point performance, and that's probably on the low end, but you add in last night a 15-point performance from Miles Turner with that continuity, that changes everything offensively, having that third consistent option. You didn't have that last night. That's to your point, that's the difference between a good team and a great team. A great team can overcome losing one of your key options, even if it is the third option versus Siakam and Halliburton. I think we're all in agreement, 1A and 1B. But with a good team that's still trying to find cohesive connectivity post-Buddy Hield trade, post-injuries, I think Miles had a massive impact on that, and it's felt throughout the entirety of the roster.
I'm going to take a quick step back, big picture here. Remember last season when we were talking about the Indiana Pacers and just how we wish they would blow teams out and be able to finish games and stop winning so many close games? I tweeted this after the first win against Brooklyn. That was their 29th game in which they had defeated the team by 10-plus points. Last season, they had 9. So when you look at it from that perspective, this season, they've been better in that regard of being able to close out and finish out teams and beat teams the way you should beat some of them. I think that next step next year is learning from these type of games and being able to prepare for those teams that aren't good in terms of record, that don't match up to your skill set, and you play to your competition level and not their competition level.
I think that I mean, I agree with all that, Eddie. I think that the thing that we have to remind ourselves is this, and it's perhaps a little bit tempering to say, I realize, but we've got to go back to, and it's not hard to do right now when you look outside, right? If we go back to like late October, early November, and what the expectations were of the Pacers for this season, the expectations for this season, and notably if we go back to the beginning of last year, the entire narrative about the Pacers was that this was a team that was like a 3-year window. Now, they pushed in a little bit by getting Siakam because I think they were ahead of schedule. But we became spoiled a little bit and kind of accustomed to assuming that this particular team or this installment of the Pacers was like ready now because they had, and notably, the in-season tournament success. And everybody got that taste of the national television game, only game on with Los Angeles on the weekend, and literally it felt like the basketball world was all watching Indiana, and we all got reminded of like being in the finals, being in
there was a watch
Pacers
party
and
at
Racers.
Cambridge.
Right.
Like, it was crazy. The atmosphere in there was awesome.
And so that therefore I think that people accelerated their timeline of assuming that they were there now. And they are still a young team for the most part in terms of not only the age of their players, but also the experience level they have in playing with one another. I'm not making excuses for them. I'm simply saying we have to remind ourselves of that they are, in fact, in totality, in the grand picture, ahead of schedule. That does not alleviate or take away from the disappointment or the souring of a game against the Nets that you should absolutely have to put yourself in position to go into the postseason. Now, what I'm getting at is they are still learning the consistency. That's the thing that most eludes this group, is the consistency night in and night out of winning the games you're supposed to win. That, like, you look at Purdue, okay? For the most part, like when Purdue lost to Northwestern, Brian Newbert said this to us on Monday, that when they lost to Northwestern, he knew that Purdue was in pretty good shape when Zach Edey's like, we're fine. Like, just calm down, we're fine. And they righted the ship and they kept going. I mean, you're going to hit bumps in the road, right? And with the Pacers, those Northwestern games happen just too often. And yeah, then you turn around and you get a couple of wins that you're like, oh, wow. And they do kind of play up to competition, which I guess is a good note for the playoffs. But I just think that we have to kind of reset and remind ourselves on what the timeline is.
Why that's tough for me, and I think that your overall sentiment there rings true with most of the Pacers fan base, but why it's tough for me is my synopsis of this team going into the season with Buddy Hield, with another year of Tyrese Halliburton, with Miles Turner having been secured the previous year in terms of where the contract situation was, with what we saw at times a year ago. And you could easily point to why they missed the playoffs a year ago was the absence of Tyrese Halliburton in times when he was struggling with injury. And they really, I know they got out of the gate really hot. Almost as hot as Mike's Hot Honey Drizzle, if you will, Jake.
That's right.
From Lou Malnati's last season, right? They got out to that great start. And then injuries and other things kind of wrecked the season to the point that, okay, you have a nice building block. And so my synopsis from them going into the year was, I feel like this can be a playoff team. And if they end up missing it by a game, that's not bad, considering patience should still be the verbiage that is practiced because they are ahead of schedule. There's no doubt about that. They put themselves also ahead of schedule when they went out and they acquired Pascal Siakam, as you highlighted there. That's where it kind of changed the tides of, I still think they're a piece away from being a great team. That said, it is a bit of a tease and frustrating aspect for the fan base when it feels like they are right there to being a playoff team, to being a truly like high-level good team, mid-pack in the East, and then you have a performance like last night where it's frustrating. Doesn't mean you can't still have patience, but it's like, man, you know they're a better team than Brooklyn. We don't have the built-in, it was a second night of, you know they're a better team than Brooklyn. You know the second night of a back-to-back to deal with on the side there. It's just a normal game with a day off in between. And to stumble the way they did, it's just frustrating is the best word for it. And maybe it was just because they are only a good team and losing a key piece like Miles Turner really impacted things. But they also still had opportunities to close out that game late, and they couldn't do it. And that's the part that is for me, the most agonizing, because I agree with you. If the season ended tomorrow and they lost in the play-in tournament, or they lost in the first round of the playoffs, it wouldn't be a failure of a season. They would be ahead of schedule. But boy, if you could avoid the play-in altogether, and I know that's what they want to do, that's what the fan base wants, it just feels like a missed opportunity that thankfully still allows you opportunities to right the ship with a matchup against Miami this weekend and winnable games still left on the schedule starting tomorrow night back at Gamebridge against the Thunder.
I am fired up for tonight, by the way. I'm fired up for tonight. Indiana State with the chance to finalize the redemption tour. Now, Indiana State's narrative that they should have gotten in the NCAA tournament, which I think is at this point, and I don't know that Indiana State really even had a lot of proving to do in that regard because of the fact that most prognosticators, most national people thought they should have been in to begin with. It wasn't like Indiana State was snubbed and then like people outside of Indiana were like, yeah, I mean, whatever, they didn't deserve to be in. I mean, most people that you read are like, why is this team not in the tournament? And they're so fun to watch in terms of their ball movement, the pace in which they play, but the controlled pace in which Indiana State plays. So my question for you, Jimmy Cook, is this. Does Indiana State need to win tonight to cement that argument, which, it's a moot point. They're not going to go back and reseed the tournament, but have they proved their point? Is the point made at this by now? If there was anybody it needed to be made towards.
Yes, the point.
Or do they need to get one more to, in fact, kind of cement it?
No, I mean, look, anytime you have an opportunity to win a championship, especially with all of the ramifications that we know are coming, being the likely departure, of Josh Schertz, the potential of players entering the portal and what Indiana State's going to look like next year. With all that hanging in the balance and the unknown for the Sycamores moving forward, it would feel bitter to not close it off at the end, to not hoist the trophy at Hinkle Fieldhouse tonight. But in terms of what the point they proved, I mean, for me, the point was proved. I'll be honest. The point was proved for me when Virginia did what they did against Colorado State in the first half. And it's like, this is the team you chose over? You thought that Tony Bennett's group was going to have better luck than a high-powered Indiana State team? That's where the door was closed for me. But in terms of probably the casual observer, I would say once they punched their ticket to the Final Four, the Final Four of the NIT, it put doubt away. For you, when did that happen? Because again, for me, that Virginia-Colorado State game, and solely on Virginia, was an abomination to watch to the point that it's like, what are we doing, committee? This is what you wanted? This is what you wanted to be in there, a brand name school that put up like 16 points and a half. That's what deserved to be in? Where did it happen for you, Jake?
I think...
Or has it happened yet? Are you on the side that they need to win
No,
tonight?
I think it, because they had the advantage going into it that people were like, this is absurd, right? I think the fact that they've now beaten teams from big conferences like back to back to back, right? And they have hung around in games where it was in the balance and then they just closed strong. I think they've made their point. One of the things I thought about last night, and as I mentioned, I'm going to be there tonight, and I'm excited about it, going with JMV again. And I was on the Butler campus again last night because we went to a show at Clues, and I'm driving past Hinkle and realized and had forgotten that the women's NIT is also going on there, of course, right? And you knew who was playing in the women's NIT last night. And then I thought, wait a minute. The St. Louis Billikens are in the women's NIT at Hinkle Fieldhouse. I would assume that means the athletic director of the St. Louis Billikens is at Hinkle Fieldhouse, correct?
That's a fair assumption.
Does that mean that the athletic director of the St. Louis Billikens, when walking in the back hallway, might have bumped into Josh Schertz at some point?
It's plausible.
Oh, excuse me. How are you? I'm good. We haven't talked, I know, correct? Well, it's nice to see you, but not again. That's correct. Take care. All right, talk soon.
Are we painting out an image of Josh Schertz with a net around his neck in a back alley of Hinkle signing a contract? Is that what's happening here?
Are we talking about an elementary school relationship? That was that level of conversation.
Check yes or no, baby.
That is a little bit what it sounds like, right? But again, you know, Eddie, I think you said it best. When it comes to Josh Schertz and St. Louis, the fact that there has been no peep at all about any other candidate or discussion, like why would St. Louis not have had a hire by now, right?
That is correct, yeah. You pretty much have to hope that Indiana State's able to retain as many of the players as they can from this current roster. It doesn't seem optimistic that they're going to be able to do so, but you never know.
I think if we asked JMV, and I know we'll have the opportunity to, well, actually, and now I'm going to put us all on the spot here. If he's on remote today, we won't get the opportunity to. But I think if you asked him the importance of this, he would say it's monumental to close it out tonight because to Eddie's point about trying to retain players and who's going to be the next head coach, assuming things trend that way, you look at the history of Indiana State. I mean, there's only a couple pockets over the last, 50 years, 60 years where they've been in position to either make a tournament or win something of substance. So, yeah, maximize the opportunity and close it out now because, yes, the idea of losing a coach of Schertz caliber stings, but the idea of having to rebuild the program is a daunting task that you'd like to wait for the offseason to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that tonight is going to be very mixed emotions for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows going into it, this is the last time they're going to see it. And that sucks, quite frankly, right? It's the reality of it. I mean, look at Indiana State's situation. This is a basketball program, and give a lot of credit to Sherrod Clinkscales, a lot. When they made the coaching change to move on from Greg Lansing and they hired this guy from a school that nobody'd heard of, who'd won like 70+% of his games, but nobody was familiar with him, and he comes in and that was a home run hire. But you have a president of the university on her way out. You have no athletic director because Clinkscales is gone. And word has been, I'm not saying factual, but I've certainly heard that part of why he's no longer there is because it was highly suggested upon him that he do away with the football program. And he did not want to do that. So he's no longer there. So now you've got a potential coaching vacancy with no president and no athletic director. I don't know how that works. And you can't blame, so you want so badly to see the band stay together, but you can't blame anybody if the band breaks up. Anybody. I mean, whether you're a student athlete, whether you're a coach, whether you're involved in the athletic department, you can't blame anybody for looking for greener pasture. And yes, it is true that the grass is not always greener on the other side, but when the green is triple the amount, that certainly helps fertilize things a little bit, right?
You can hire a landscaper now.
10 times the amount, not even triple, 10 times the amount, 8 times the amount, right? I mean, yeah. Not only that, all you got to do is get on the interstate. You literally pull out of your house and you get on 70, and depending on whether you live on the south or north side of it, you just take a left or a right, and you're there in 2.5 hours. Okay, new digs. I get it. But, so there will be that emotion for people tonight. But at the same time, I just think, and I hope this. I think Seton Hall is really good. And they played really well in the semifinals, obviously. But whatever happens, I do hope that the Indiana State fans, and I hope and think they're going to win. I mean, don't get me wrong. But if they don't, I hope the Indiana State fans in Hinkle Fieldhouse tonight stand up and applaud that team and that group for like 45 consecutive seconds. And just let them know, I think they know how special they are to the ISU faithful, but let them know again. And how often I went to a game this year, there were 3,500 people there. So how often do Indiana State fans get to collectively like bond together like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a once in a generation moment. whether it's an NCAA Final Four, an NIT Final Four, or in this case, an NIT championship game, celebrate either way because you don't know when you're going to be back. And I'm with you, Jake. I think they're going to win. I think it's going to be a great, bittersweet moment for everybody involved. It's a heck of a way to go out to end this current era of Sycamores basketball. But it's weird because you don't often. I'll defer to you as the older of the two of us, which is well documented on this program. I don't know of an instance where, definitively players and coaches, but specifically let's focus on shirts, almost definitively this is the end of the road. This is definitively the final game. And oh, by the way, it's in a championship game. Like, how often do those stars align where regardless of the outcome, win or lose, an era's over? It's not a common occurrence in sport, right?
But by the way, I was wrong about something. The women's NIT is actually played at SIU Edwardsville, I guess, on Saturday. The WBIT was at Hinkle.
Oh, okay.
Which is Illinois and Villanova, so my apologies. Like I said, I didn't go by. I mean, I was driving past it.
So it was a FaceTime then?
What's that?
So it was a FaceTime then?
That's right.
Okay.
So my apologies. It was Illinois and Villanova at Hinkle. So Illinois should have had a big crowd there, right? Little home court advantage, right?
From a player standpoint, I guess with Peyton, it was pretty clear that was going to be the end. Like thinking back just 9 years ago, I feel like the vibe was, even though he didn't publicly say it, he was going to retire after that Super Bowl. And I know this isn't retirement, this is just going to a new job, but I feel like the intersection of championships and departures are rare.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Here's the thing. I go back to, I don't think anybody from Indiana State could blame anybody, right? Like, the fans at Indiana State are going to be disappointed, but they're going to be like, I totally get it.
You're not pointing fingers at, Robbie Avila. That's not happening.
Right. I mean, and especially if some of those guys go with him to St. Louis, right? That will certainly, I guess, help soften the blow, if you will. I'm excited to talk about Rick Mount. Yourself?
I'm very excited.
I wonder if anybody remembers where they were on Valentine's Day of 1966. I wasn't around, but people that were around on Valentine's Day of 1966. What's your most memorable Valentine's Day, Jimmy?
I perfectly orchestrated flowers being delivered. I don't know.
What year?
Well, I do it every year for my wife. But
okay.
the most significant
Do you have a Valentine's Day that jumps out at you specifically? Elementary school, middle school, high school, anything?
Not really, no.
Okay. Thanks for playing along. So the most memorable Valentine's Day for Rick Mount would have been Valentine's Day of 1966. It was when Rick Mount appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And many people think that Rick Mount was the first high school athlete on the cover of Sports Illustrated. True or false?
The way you led that question, Your Honor, I'm going to say false.
Correct. He was the first athlete from a team sport to be featured independently on Sports Illustrated's cover. But there had been other individualized athletes like tennis, track and field, whatever it might be, to appear on the cover. But Rick Mount, of course, was Mr. Basketball in Indiana. He is an absolute icon within the state, and he was part of the team. In 1969, he was the leader of the team. He was the leading scorer on the team. He was the guy that had him straighten out rims when Purdue went to the 1969 Final Four. His thoughts on the Boilers returning there. That and more in our conversation with the Rocket is next.
I'm John Morgan. When you call Morgan...
I will be honest with you, it feels almost unnecessary to have an introduction for our next guest. He is a basketball icon in the state of Indiana, and you will never meet, and I can tell you that as sure as today is Thursday, you will never meet anybody who saw him play that will tell you anything other than Rick Mount is the greatest shooter they have ever seen in the game of basketball. He was, of course, on the 1969 Purdue team that made the Final Four. They got all the way into, in the Final Four, the national championship game before dropping to UCLA. But Rick Mount joins us on the program now. Rick, it is a true pleasure. How are you?
Okay, Jake, how you doing?
You know what? I'm excited for Purdue. I'm excited for their fans and, just this run. Excited to talk to you as well. So let's begin with this. I mean, you are, one of the, if not the all-time great at Purdue, and now you get a chance to see your alma mater in the Final Four. First off, just your reaction about where they are now and your thoughts on the job Matt Painter's done.
Oh, Matt's a great coach, and he's done a great job bringing these guys to where they are right now. And the team is playing well. I think they got their first five, and they got Gillis, and they got Heidi, and they got Coleman at the other three spots. They got 8 guys that can play and get it done. So I think they're going to be okay.
When you look back, Rick, on your time playing for Purdue, and I had read, and I don't know if this is true or not, that you ended up at Purdue, obviously close to home, right there near Lebanon. I thought I read somewhere that maybe Miami was another school where you were thinking about going, but obviously it worked out for you at Purdue. What are your overall memories, I guess, and just your sentiments in general of being a Boilermaker?
Well, it was the fan. I remember Red Mackey. I went in and had a meeting with him on my visit, and he was the athletic director. He's the one that started all this Purdue Mackey Arena. And it was the offices were there, but it was just a big hole, And so he says, this is my dream, Rick, and we want you to be part of it. And it turned out to be that I was part of it, and we got it going. We had the dedication game with UCLA. And we almost beat them. And there was I always remember this. Bob King was an assistant coach at Purdue, and he was downstairs on the floor. He told me this story, talking with a guy, and the guy says, I don't know if they're going to let you play, Bob, because you probably got 16, 17,000 in there and only held 14,123. And he says, the fire marshal might shut this game down. He said, bull crap. He's sitting right over there on the front row. So they weren't going to shut the game down. He had front row tickets and the fans. That's when it all started with the fans and crazy and teams hated to come to Purdue to play because of the fans, and they were great.
Rick, what do you remember most about that run by you and the Boilermakers in '69?
Well, see, back then you only played 32 games instead of 68 now or something like that. And we started out in the Mideast Regional in Wisconsin, and we played Miami, Ohio, and Kentucky played Marquette, and we won, and Marquette beat up on Kentucky pretty good, but that's where it started right there, and I always remember this. You need a little luck once in a while to get that far to the final game. You got to have a little luck too. So we're playing Marquette with Al McGuire, and Al McGuire was a fiery guy. He was really fiery, and he came by George King at the half. We had him down a little bit, and I'm getting some rosin on my hand, and he turns and gets right in George King's face and says, "Now we're going to kick your ass." and George says, "You couldn't do it in the NBA. You're not going to be able to do it now." So the game was right down to the wire. It's tied up with 25 seconds to go, and Dean Meminger, you've heard of that name.
Yep.
And he's got the ball. He's out there, and they're going to hold it for one. They ain't going to give us they're not going to give us a shot at it. They're going to take a shot, and if it goes in, they win, or it goes in overtime. So he shoots one from about 16 feet, comes off the rim, and a big George Faber, the Faber B. Winda, that guy made millions of dollars on that. The guy's starting to put it up with 2 seconds to go, and Faber just grabbed him. So this guy's got 2 shots, and I always remember this. And if he makes one of them, we lose and we go home. Right before he got the ball, the referee gave him the ball. I'm in the block-out lane. He turns to me and he says, "It's over." He's telling me it's over. So I didn't say anything to him because I want him to keep concentrating on what he just said to me, So he puts the first shot up and it hits the neck of the rim, comes off. Now I'm looking at him. I'm not saying anything to him. He won't look at me now. And the second free throw he put up was an air ball. So the game goes in overtime. And I hit that last second shot in overtime to put us in the Final Four. But, things like that, all you had to do is hit one shot, one free throw, and they beat us. But they didn't.
So, Rick, let me tell you the story George Faber told me years ago.
He lies a lot. Just remember, he lies a lot. Okay?
That's the best part about George Faber, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
his windows are a lot more clear and easy to see through than his stories, right? So,
yeah.
So Rick, Faber tells me that in that Marquette game at Wisconsin Fieldhouse, you're in overtime, you're getting ready to. Your George King calls a timeout. You're in the huddle, and Faber admits to me, he says, "Jake, we're walking out of that huddle, and I can barely walk straight because my knees are knocking because I'm so nervous because there's just the tension and the moment." And he said, "I feel this tug at my jersey, and I turn around, and it's Mount, and Mount says something to me." Now, I guess I'll put you on the spot. No, I take that back. I'm not going to put you on the spot by telling you I'll just tell you what he told me you said, and I want you to tell me if it's fact or fiction, but just say it's fact because it's such a great story. He said that you basically said, "Hey, Big George, you see all these people in the stands? All of them are still going to read about it in the paper in the morning because they're going to love what they're about to see." And then you went out and hit the shot. True or false?
Similar to that.
Yes.
And thing about George Faber, a guy named Thompson, you've heard of that guy. He played in the ABA.
Yep.
He was on Marquette too. Now he's got it on the wing with 25 seconds to go in the overtime. And
George Thompson, by the way. Yep.
George Thompson, yeah. And Faber's guarding him. Faber gets on his knees and steals the ball from him with about 14 seconds to go. So we got it, timeout, just like you said. And George says, "Well, we're gonna run it down to about 8 seconds, and Mount's going to get the ball and he's going to shoot it. And if he misses overtime, if he hits it, we're in the Final Four." And then I said something to George about that story he told you.
Beautiful.
And so we let it go down to about 6, and in George's cussing ways, I'm not going to say what he said, but the guy coaches told me this, that, "Damn it, they waited too long," like that. And I get the ball. Jerry Johnson sets a little pick over there, and I get off on it, and about 23-footer, and get nothing but that, and we're in the Final Four.
Rick, when you grow up in Indiana, Rick Mount is our guest. When you grow up in Indiana, there are, I think before you learn to ride a bike in this state, before you learn your ABCs, you learn two facts. The first is that Rick Mount was on the cover of Sports Illustrated in high school. Only a female swimmer had done that before as a high school athlete. And the other is that Rick Mount once in a pregame could tell that the rim was cocked and went up to the officials in Iowa and said, look, the rim's bent. And they got out a ladder and a ruler and they said, I'll be damned, he's right. How in the world could you tell that a rim was bent? And take me through that story.
Yeah, well, I've shot on so many rims, but it happened in the final. We go in on Wednesday for a shoot around at Freedom Hall.
Yeah, it happened twice, right?
Yeah, and we go in there and they just put the rims up. And I told George, I said that one rim down to that north end down there is down on the right hand side. You better tell that guy that. And he goes down and tells that guy, and the guy, and he comes back over there and he says, kiss his ass. I said, well, then kiss his ass, get his level out, and put the level on there, and it was off. So he got it straightened out, that guy, the maintenance guy, and that's how that story was, and but you've shot, I shot so many shots and millions of shots, maybe millions, that every time I'd look, I could tell it was even or what.
You guys blow away, obviously Carolina in the Final Four. You get into the national championship game against UCLA. And I'm curious for you, Rick Mount, in the years since then, how often you think about, because I know Purdue fans do, The reality is your teammate Chuck Bavis is hurt. I mean, he's your center, right? He's unavailable. Gilliam's hurt. Billy Keller's dinged up. How much do you lose sleep still to this day occasionally over what could have been if you'd been healthy?
Well, go back to that North Carolina game with Dean Smith. They come out of the ACC all hepped up, and Charlie Scott. They got Charlie Scott, a couple 7-footers and things, but in an article when we were down there, they were interviewing Gene, the coach, North Carolina coach, and he never mentioned Purdue's name in this article. All he could talk about is how he was going to hold Lou Alcindor and what they were going to do against Lou Alcindor and all this bull crap, And how that goes, because, Keller and Gilliam and Davis and myself, we were pretty competitive. And so we come out and beat them 92-67. So that got us into the final game. And we were dinged up. Bavis got hurt in the Mid-East Regional. He tore something in his chest and cartilage or whatever it was. And Gilliam had a bad leg, and Keller had some problems, and I had a few problems. So we won at full strength. And we played them out there in California, the first game of the season. They beat us 5 points out there at Pauley Pavilion. And, they beat us 1 point at Purdue. So this would be the third time we'd played them. And the bad thing about it, Jerry Johnson, he was about 6'9", weighed about 165, 175. There's no way he was going to hold Lou Alcindor away from that basket. Now, Bavis could. They always talked about Bavis. And Bavis, he kind of got the short end of the deal with us because we, with Gilliam and Keller and myself, we were perimeter offensive team, and Bavis, he scored 12 and 10, but he got kind of shortchanged a little bit, but he would have got a chance to play in the NBA, I think. So we had 4 guys that were pro players. So, anytime, and I think this team right now, Smith said it pretty well last week, we are on a mission. And I love when he said that because we were on a mission too. We didn't talk trash. We didn't make fun of people. When we got between those lines and laced them up, we were going to beat your ass. That's what it was all about. And so, but Big Lou was in the way, and we were runner up. And Jake, I tell you, nobody remembers who was runner up. You got to win it, and that's what I'm saying about Purdue. If they don't win it, and if they get beaten in the championship game, they'll always say Connecticut, Connecticut, Connecticut. They won't mention Purdue's name unless you're in Mackey Arena or something like that, watching the game. So it was fun, and we went a long way, and we just didn't get it done all the way.
Rick, I know it's, obviously it's kind of apples and oranges because of so many factors, games played, years played. I mean, obviously you couldn't play as a freshman back in those days, but the reality is that Zach Edey is now statistically the leading scorer in Purdue history. His journey has been fascinating to watch. Just what is your overall reaction in seeing your record eclipsed and watching Zach Edey represent Purdue?
Well, I don't hold it against Zach Edey. He said, here's the way I feel about it, and I don't want to sound sour grapes, but apples, the oranges, yeah, but apples to apples, no. I played 72 games and had 23, and I think he went by me at 140 games. And I don't hold that against him. He set his own. What I feel, in my mind, he set his own record of 140 games. He's the leading scorer. I'm not going to, the guy's a great player, a college player, and so great. I had it for 54 years. So, and the thing is, nothing against the players that played there, but a lot of those players had a 140-game career. And I can't believe it wasn't broken before then, I'm not knocking anybody, but but I don't know. It was great, and they're on a roll. And I'll tell you one thing. I don't know if anybody can get 61, though. That's a lot of points.
And I'll tell you what, double figures for 72 consecutive games, 46 games with 30 or more for Rick Mount. Obviously a prolific career. I'm curious of this. I know you still put up shots. I know you still teach kids how to shoot the basketball. You still try to get the right fundamentals for shooters. When Rick Mount watches basketball in 2024 and looks back on since when you were playing to now, the best shooter Rick Mount has seen is who?
Me? No.
Yes.
I don't see anybody better than me. I hate this. I'm not being cocky. Well, I am being cocky because I could do it. But, gosh, I don't know. It's kind of I'd have to think on that a while.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of people have to think on that a while, right? If you tell people the best shooter not named Rick Mount, they're like, I don't know. I got to think about it. Steph Curry probably comes to mind because of the quick release, but just in terms of pure fundamental, right?
Yeah, I'm jumping up over people and stuff like that. But some people say, well, who do you think was the best shooter ever? Now, well, Jimmy Rail's going to say me. It's Jimmy Rail. Alfred's going to say him, and I'm going to say me. But I said that's why they make McDonald's and small little pubs and bars and barber shops and stuff, so everybody can go in and argue who was the best shooter to ever live. And that kind of so, but it was fun, and Purdue was a great place. And what I love about Purdue is their fans. They had great fans, and we had, we got beat by Iowa in the Big Ten my senior year, and I'd have to look it up, but we only lost 3 games in that place in 3 years, and we had a 33-game winning streak till Iowa beat us 1 point at the end of my senior year. And that's pretty good. And I had really good players with me, though. You got to remember that.
Rick, lastly, what's your plan for the game? I mean, are you going to be going out to Phoenix, or do you going to just stay around so you can go to the barbershop and talk about it the day after for the Final Four? Rick Mount's Purdue plans on watching the Boilers is what?
Well, I'm going to get me an iced tea. I'm going to come in my office here, and I'm going to watch the game, sit in my easy chair.
That is good living right there, right?
Well, I don't have to mess with anybody, you know, and people ask me, what do you think and stuff. I'm just sitting here and cuss a little bit and yell a little bit.
Absolutely beautiful. Rick, I'll tell you what, man, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. You know, one of the great things about teams making runs is it allows us to then talk about other great players and great moments in the school's history, and you absolutely are a pillar amongst that, and with Indiana basketball as well.
Appreciate it, Jake.
Appreciate it very much. Rick Mount, the Rocket, and, of course, Mr. Basketball, the pride of Lebanon. Still, you see it if you're driving on 65. The name right there, Rick Mount for Lebanon, Indiana. A little bit over. We will take a break. We'll come back. Derek Whittenburg joins us, by the way, bottom of the 1 o'clock hour.
Hey, JMV, new inventory arriving daily at Miss M's.
Admittedly, selfishly speaking, that was a lot of fun for me because growing up, I don't have to tell you folks, you grew up in Indiana, and Rick Mount is a legend. But Rick Mount is also, admittedly, not somebody that does a lot of interviews per se. I mean, he's just happy living in Lebanon, drinking his iced tea and watching games. I would be remiss if I did not send a special thank you to Mark Monteith for that, because Mark Monteith is close with Rick Mount, and Monteith and I are good friends, and Mark helped set that up. And you could tell in listening to Rick Mount the respect that he has for Mark Monteith because of the comfort level he seemingly had in that interview.
We have Mark Monteith on the program tomorrow afternoon.
Mark has written a book about Purdue basketball, followed around Purdue basketball, and has a really cool book out that we'll talk to him about as well on an Indy 500 legend that Mark did not write, but found a 60-plus-year-old manuscript of the book and decided to complete the project, which is very cool. I'm also excited to hear from Derek Whittenberg for the North Carolina State side of things, and we'll let you know a little bit more about that next.
If you're talking about it,
Caitlin Clark.
Company, Eddie Garrison just made a corporate decision. Eddie?
Yes, Jake.
Would you like to announce to folks your corporate decision?
Oh, my corporate decision. Is this a good decision? That I
Do you need the president to step in and clean this up? Because I can if you need me to.
Let's Eddie, can you play the bumper music again? We're just going to redo the.
I can't. We'll replay that Rich Mountain interview in case you missed it at 2:30 after our conversation with Tony East, of course. If you did not hear it then and you won't hear it later, you can go to 1075thefan.com. You can go to the podcast center. It's a banner right there at the top of the screen. All you have to do is click it, and then it will take you to the podcast pages for each of the 3 shows: the Wake Up Call with KB and Andy, our show, Korean Company, and the Ride with GMV as well. And, of course, right there you see the conglomerate of like 5 different stories. There is one that you can click on, and it'll take you to a link where it's a Purdue page of all the interviews that we've done this week so far with Purdue guests from the morning show, our show, and with JMV. So if you missed Dakota Mathias, Matt Painter, et cetera, you can go right there, and you can find those interviews as well.
This from Randy. Jake, thanks for the Rocket interview. As a Lebanon grad, that was neat. If you've not reached out to Brian Walker, you should get him on to discuss the 80 team. Eddie, you have also wielded your CEO power on that one, right?
Yeah, I have a message out to Brian Walker, just waiting to hear back from him on that one. Hopefully that is a Monday conversation previewing the national championship game.
And that, of course, would happen if Purdue is to beat North Carolina State. Coming up in about 28 minutes, we're going to talk to Derek Whittenburg, and many of you may be saying, now, Derek Whittenburg, I'm jogging my memory here. It's funny how things work out, Jimmy. I had mentioned this the other day, but I was sitting, I know that Regent Brian thinks that I don't like pay attention to sports at all, but I was sitting watching games the other night, and I'm like, you know what? There's a chance that North Carolina State could end up playing Houston in the tournament. And I think that we naturally have a tendency to elevate, and I'm probably as guilty of this as anybody, but I think that we have a tendency to elevate sports moments from our childhood and think that they are more iconic perhaps within the realm of totality than they are. And that certainly is the case for me with the 1983 Final Four, but because I elevated in my mind, but I think I elevated to the place where it still stands within the sports landscape because there were so many iconic things about the 83 Final Four. The 1983 Final Four was at the Pit in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the University of New Mexico, and it featured Georgia with Vern Fleming and Dominique Wilkins. Although Wilkins might have been gone by then, but Vern Fleming was certainly on the team. It featured Louisville with the McRae brothers. I think both of them were still there, Scooter and Rodney. Houston with Phi Slamma Jamma. And then the Cinderella darling, North Carolina State, who had this young, personable coach named Jim Valvano that was high energy and this miracle story because they had barely gotten into the tournament. They had to win the ACC tournament to get in. They narrowly did that. And then they made this run anchored by 2 guards that were out of famed DeMatha High School, Sidney Lowe and Derek Whittenburg. And then they had a big man named Lorenzo Charles. I think Thurl Bailey might have been on that team as well. But in the semifinals was the Louisville-Houston game where Guy Lewis, the coach for Houston, threw his towel out on the floor as McRae was going for a breakaway layup, got a technical foul. And then North Carolina State had defeated Georgia to get to the championship game. And I remember, and I think most people my age or younger would agree to this, because that game was being played in the Mountain Time Zone, it started at like 9 o'clock Eastern, and no one's parents let them stay up to watch it because it was a foregone conclusion to watch North Carolina State and Houston. Phi Slamma Jamma with Clyde Drexler and, obviously Akeem Olajuwon, Young, Franklin, Benners, they were loaded. And Carolina State, Cinderella, midnight was coming. And like so many kids, I got up in the morning and my dad was like, "You're not going to believe this, but they won." I'm like, "Who won?" He's like, "North Carolina State." I'm like, "There's no way." "Well, your mom wouldn't let me wake you up, but the time was running out, and one guy shot it from like 35 feet out, and it was an air ball, but then his teammate grabbed it, and then the best part was that coach was just running around frantically looking for anybody to hug." And that became such a memorable and indelible image of the NCAA tournament of Jim Valvano. I mean, Jimmy, you've seen the video of Valvano running around, right?
Yeah, in fact, I rewatched the 30 for 30 that's based on that last night of Survive and Advance that talks about that entire run. And that's why I'm very excited. I know you've talked to him before, Jake, but have Derek Whittenburg, who is such an integral part of that run, but such an integral part of Wolfpack lore. He's still involved in the athletic department to this day. And there are a lot of parallels between NC State's run back then in 83 as there is to this Wolfpack run going on right now. And yeah, I mean that, but to your point about the montage, you could not turn on an NCAA tournament preview video for most of my childhood and even to this day and not see Valvano frantically running around trying to find somebody to celebrate.
And so when I thought that there was the possibility that Carolina State was going to be playing Houston, then I looked at it and I thought, wait a minute. So if they, because that was over the weekend, so I'm like, well, we wouldn't be able to have anybody on to preview Carolina State Houston. I'm like, but wait a minute. Carolina State, if they get to the Final Four, would play Purdue. Now, a lot has to happen for that matchup to take place. But I'm going to reach out and see if I can find Derek Whittenburg, who is the executive producer of the 30 for 30 you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So Whittenburg now works for North Carolina State University in the athletic department. And I found an email address for him and just emailed him and said who I was and said, look, we'd love to have you on the show. And he emailed me back at like 2 o'clock in the morning and was like, perfect, let's do it. So it worked out perfectly to have him because I think he can give a really good perspective on this Carolina State team. Is it a team of destiny? He's probably going to say yes. Or, you know, what are the things that are going to, if midnight is going to strike for their Cinderella, what's it going to take? You know, what's it going to be that's going to slow them down? Obviously, they have a big man that is a counter to Zach Edey in the way that he plays, but there are a lot of fun storylines. And truth be told, let's be real. If Purdue had been upset, obviously if Purdue had been beaten by Tennessee, you kind of then root for somebody to knock out Tennessee, I guess. But if Purdue wasn't in this Final Four, Carolina State's the team people are rooting for,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
They're the feel-good story.
And I got to be honest with you. I know you know this, but our audience, in case they need a wake-up call, I would imagine most of the country that is not wearing old gold and black
absolutely
are pulling for the Wolfpack
Correct.
this weekend.
Correct.
Not just because they're an 11 seed, because of their story, because of their big man. Like so many people got introduced, myself included, because admittedly I don't watch ACC basketball every single night, and I got introduced to DJ Burns in the ACC tournament, but a lot of people, it was opening weekend, seeing this big fella contort his body and make people miss, and they play a fun, just aggressive, that scrub the dirt off your feet, so to speak, type of mentality that is with any Cinderella run. They would be the America's team, the darling, if you're looking at a team to root for and you don't have any bias or rooting interest already tied to your specific home state.
It, you know, the matchup's going to be fun. The Final Four is going to be fun. And oftentimes when there is a team that makes the miracle run to get there, the sands of the hourglass run through before Saturday. You know, you look at George Mason, for example, you know, Virginia Commonwealth.
That one is tough. You're right. But that one's tough because they had another Cinderella on the other side of the glass, right?
That's true.
Because Butler, it was
George Mason did not, though.
No, George Mason definitively did not. But with VCU specifically, they had we talked about it yesterday, the Butler story with no Hayward, but it's Mack and Howard and Van Sant and Norred and Jukes.
You know, another one that we don't mention a lot in terms of the last 15 years or so, that because they were really good in the moment and in those years, but in hindsight, you look back and you're like, Wichita State?
Yeah. You forget about the Shockers.
Well, and remember their wife was the wife of the coach was always yelling at people,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Wasn't that here?
Yes, it was. I remember I'd had a little bit too much on St. Patrick's Day.
Well, I don't think you were alone.
I recall high-fiving because they beat Kentucky. And I remember high-fiving Wichita State fans. We were just out at Kilroy's, and they were leaving Lucas Oil. I remember just high-fiving them because they had upset Big Blue Nation. Yeah, that was, man, going on what? That particular matchup would have been 7 years ago. Before that, their big run, yeah, that was right around the mid-2010s.
The Wichita State situation also was interesting because Greg Marshall was so coveted, and then there were apparently some skeletons in the closet, and I don't even know where he is now. Do you?
No idea.
I mean, he was honestly one of the most sought-after coaches in college basketball. I had heard, and I'm not going to say them here, but I had heard there was some pretty ugly stuff in the past, but in his past. But does it even say where he is now?
Yeah, since he was let go at Wichita State in 2020, he has not since been involved in college basketball, at least in terms of a head coaching.
I mean, didn't he have
position.
like a private plane that gave him to fly wherever he wanted? And I mean, it was crazy. Clearly, the guy could coach.
Yeah, it was physical and verbal abuse from former players,
amongst other things, by the way. And truthfully, and I don't. She may be a lovely woman. I have no idea, but I mean, there were a couple of incidents with his wife at games, having to be like kind of told to calm down. We'll just put it that way. I don't know. Crazy stuff. Yep. By the way, a couple of reminders here, house cleaning items. Lou Malnati's. Thanks again to Lou Malnati's for presenting us with the gift cards to give away for our NCAA numbers handout. Josh, who had North Carolina State, gets a $100 gift card and a Carolina State hat. Josh has yet to claim his prize, though, right? I do have an idea that we're going to do if Josh doesn't claim it, although the Carolina State hat, I mean, what are we going to do with that? Doesn't claim it by Tuesday. I know what we're going to do with that. But the North Carolina State double-digit seed to advance the furthest gets Josh the win. Josh, you got to call in to claim your prize. Also, a $50 gift card still hanging in the balance for the team that was blown out by the largest margin. Appears as though that is going to be Kansas City Steve. He had Longwood, but still games to be played. And a $150 gift card to the winner, the overall national champion. Those still in the running. Greg with Alabama. Good Jimmy with Purdue. Josh, again, with North Carolina State. He could double dip here. And Alec with UConn. Speaking of double dip, you will love, not dip, but the drizzle of the Mike's Hot Honey that right now is on Lou Malnati's as part of tomorrow's National Deep Dish Pizza Day. And if you have not had the Mike's Hot Honey drizzle on there, it is spectacular. They brought some in here. Keep in mind, Lou Malnati's, you can get carry out for the games themselves or just for dinner every night of the week. You can do that carrying out from Broad Ripple, Carmel, Avon, Greenwood, or West 86th Street across from Brebeuf High School. And that Broad Ripple location does have dine-in right there on Ferguson across from, or right next to, I should say, the canal. And the dine-in is a very, very cool place. Also a reminder, Kevin Bowen and I, tomorrow night, 8 until 10 o'clock, District Tap North Side. Jack Daniels Small Ball. It is the competition Pop-A-Shot. We have 2 finalists. We will be from 8 until 9 o'clock letting everybody do Pop-A-Shot to come up with 2 more finalists. And then the final 4 from 9 until 10 o'clock with $1,000 on the line from Jack Daniels as part of the Jack Daniels Small Ball. And we'll have food there as well. So there will be food from District Tap in a room. You come in, get something to eat. We'll talk sports. We'll watch sports. We'll do Pop-A-Shot. We'll have a little Jack Daniels, whatever you would like. We would love to see you tomorrow night from 8 until 10 at the District Tap on the north side.
And, of course, Diet Cokes are always sufficient.
Diet Coke, perfectly sufficient, yes. And Diet Coke with a Jack Daniels, for that matter, if you'd like.
There you go.
Now, Jimmy, the other thing that I was going to ask you about, I had mentioned Kansas City Steve. Did you see Jimmy Cook? The news out of Dallas about your beloved Kansas City Chiefs.
I did not. I assume it would be tied to... No, actually, you elaborate. I'm not going to guess. Go ahead.
Does this mean I can hit the breaking news sounder for you? Since it would be breaking news to Jimmy?
It is breaking news to Jimmy, so go ahead and play it just for the heck of it, right? Thank you. I'm paraphrasing. I don't have it in front of me, but after the state of Missouri and the voters, actually, I don't think it was the state, it was the voters of Kansas City, Missouri, voted down. I love Kansas City. I love Kansas City. I love the barbecue. I love the stockyards. I love the plaza. I love my buddy Corey Lagerstrom that lives there. I've got friends in Kansas City from my time at KU. I love Kansas City. I love the sensibility of the people of Kansas City who, when, and granted the owners of the Chiefs, I think, said that they would pony up a decent, or maybe it was the Royals. One of them said they would pony up a decent amount of money, but they came with their hand out to the taxpayers. We need improvements on our stadium, please. We need new jazzy bells and whistles. Yes, Arrowhead Stadium is an iconic venue within the National Football League. Yes, it's been around forever. Yes, it is widely considered one of the best stadium atmospheres in the National Football League, with a huge parking lot where barbecue sauce emanates and you can smell the barbecue smoke all the way from Lenexa, Kansas, and Overland Park all the way through to Junction City. It's wonderful. And everybody loves it, and people flock from all around to come see Patrick Mahomes and the wonderful team. But that's not good enough. We need you, the taxpayers, to give us more. We've got to improve more. And the taxpayers said, you know what? Sorry. This is a drive-through. Wrong place. I don't know what you're doing here. And they voted it down. They voted it down and said, enough. We're not going to give more money. You're billionaires. You can pay for it. So the mayor of Dallas, Texas, which is, you know, Jimmy, knowing the history of your Kansas City Chiefs, they began as what?
They were the Dallas Texans once upon a time. That is correct.
The mayor of Dallas, Texas has spoken. Hey, Kansas City Chiefs. You can always come back and be the Dallas Texans. # Cotton Bowl. We got a stadium for you. We're a growing area. We've got rabid football fans. Not all are Cowboys fans. They'd like another team to root for. So we're just going to call them the Dallas Texans. And if you want to just go ahead and balk at the taxpayers of Kansas City, then head on down. It's not going to happen.
No, it's far more likely if there was a move, and I don't want to get into the whole, like, the ethics of it I kind of tend to side with you, Jake, on billionaires should be able to take care of their own stadiums, involving it with tax dollars, whether it's property tax, sales tax, whatever. It's a slimy business. And I appreciate, the power of a voice or voices, this being up for a vote. But the more likely scenario for them is that they move to Kansas. Kansas has said for the last couple of years, as there's been rumblings of them wanting to renovate Arrowhead Stadium and have some more modern upgrades there, that if they can't get something like this passed, just come across the border. Come to Kansas City, Kansas, we'll be all good. I think it's more likely they leave Jackson County, Missouri, where the voters push this down, and go across the state line than it is they go entire region of the country.
And for those that are unfamiliar, by the way, and I'm going to put this in Indianapolis terms, okay? Imagine if the state line from, and I'm not kidding you, imagine if the state line from Indiana to Illinois was Holt Road. Or, like, not necessarily Michigan. You'd have to go a little bit further west than that. Georgetown Road. That's it. Georgetown Road. If Georgetown Road ran all the way down, that's how close if you are in Kansas City and you go to Arrowhead Stadium and you're on 70, and Arrowhead and Royal Stadium, Kauffman Stadium, whatever it's called now, or on the left.
It's Kauffman, yeah.
And you go through, so you're approaching downtown. So imagine in Indianapolis, if you're approaching downtown on 70 from the east, and you make that bend when you get past Keystone and you start to see the skyline in front of you, right in that area. So like is it Rural Street and Keystone that's an exit on I-70? That would be about where the stadiums are. That's the Missouri side. And then as soon as you get through downtown and you're like right on the part where you are going past downtown, coming up on literally like the Holt Road exit of 70 is the Kansas state line. I mean, it's right there.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have to go very far. And if you live in suburban Kansas City, I mean, literally, it's like you don't even know half the time. Like my buddy Corey lives in Kansas City, Kansas, and I was at his house and we went to dinner, and literally it was like 10 minutes away to this restaurant, and he's like, well, now we're in Missouri. You don't even know it, right? I mean,
no.
So that does give them a little bit of a flexibility from a different tax base, I believe, because when I was at KU, as I've told you before, I had buddies that lived in a subdivision where the road going through the middle of the subdivision was State Line Road. And I mean, it was like a neighborhood road.
Right.
But two guys living right across the street from each other, two different mayors, two different governors, and two different out-of-state tuitions. Crazy, right? So
but
they
to
do
your
have a
point,
little bit of flexibility.
To your point, I know this has been a long topic that you've championed. To your point, good for Jackson County for standing up and refusing to add further payment towards a sports team of billion-dollar proportions.
I just think, and people get on me about this all the time, because sports is how I make my living, and I'm very grateful for it. And I love what sports has done for Indianapolis, from the National Sports Festival to the amateur sports capital of the world, to the Pan Am Games, and then in between those two, the building of the Hoosier Dome, to getting an NFL team. I understand all of it. To getting Super Bowls, it's fabulous. Don't get me wrong. But when I was older than I should have been, I will simply say that. I was in my 20s, but when I was older than I should have been, one day my dad said to me, "You know it's over, right?" And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "The gravy train. It's over. I'm not writing checks for you, Jake, to bail you out again when you don't budget your checkbook or when you get a speeding ticket you forgot about or whatever it might be." And I'll never forget. He said, "Your mom will have you living here till you're 50 if she could have it," which means I would have moved out a year ago. But and he said, "But it's over now." I mean, it was a tough love moment, but it was the best thing ever to happen to me because it forced me. He was not kidding around, right? So I knew then, like, wait a minute, I've got to start becoming more responsible and taking care of where my money's going and how I'm living and the decisions I'm making because my safety net is being pulled out from underneath me. And with professional sports teams, I understand what sports do for a community. I do. But in terms of the constant plea and handout of taxpayers to always keep up with the Joneses, it's a never-ending cycle. And eventually some of these cities have to say, it's over. It's over. You've got a stadium. You've got a place you can play. You've got billions of dollars in television revenue coming in. So you want fancier Jumbotron screens to entice even more fans? Eventually we have to quit paying for it. We have other priorities. We have public education system, and people are going to get on me about, well, those are different tax areas, whatever. I get all of it. And I'm not going to get on my soapbox about Lucas Oil Stadium and the financial strain that I think it's put on the city of Indianapolis. But all I'm saying is, and I think people can read between the lines here, I applaud any city and any taxpayer base that is willing to stand up and say and call bluff. They're going to call bluff. And they're going to say, it's over. The gravy train's over. And what are the Kansas City Chiefs really going to do? They're really going to leave? I mean, come on.
It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if they moved to Kansas. It wouldn't.
Fine. Same market.
Well, no, it is, but at that point it becomes they were willing to pay and you weren't. And then we have another situation, not nearly to the same degree, but I guess at least if it happens, if it's a split like this, it's not as bad as what happened in Oakland. I know those are two separate issues, but you're seeing a lot of that in the news right now. Broke today that the Athletics are going to play in Sacramento,
yeah.
And they're not going to be called anything other than the A's or the Athletics during that time.
What's the schedule going to say?
I hope it's just the for the location and then Athletics for the name.
It's like now, which takes us to a whole other topic. Derek Whittenburg coming up, by the way, under 10. I got so used to it and actually kind of liked it that I think Washington should have stayed with Washington football team.
Yeah.
Didn't everybody deep down kind of think it was cool?
It warmed on a lot of people as the seasons wore on. I would agree.
The simplicity of it was kind of cool.
It had, which is weird. It's weird it would have been adopted and had such a craze about it. That's basically the formula for football clubs. Football clubs, I mean soccer clubs.
That's what I mean.
There's not really nicknames. It is just Manchester United, Manchester City. There's no. That's an American idea of having a mascot.
I'll give you an idea. I'll give you an example.
After the city,
when the Indy 11 were first announced, and 11 is cool. I mean, I get it, and I understand the history of it, and I'm cool with it. But when they first announced it, there was part of me that thought, because of its history within the market, what is the biggest, most famous, and most lucrative sports venue in the state of Indiana?
In terms of just totality of the state? Oh, yeah, the Speedway.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
The Speedway.
Yes.
The Indianapolis Motor Speedway, when it was purchased by Tony Holman, it was purchased in a business deal that went down at the Indianapolis Downtown Athletic Club.
R.I.P.
That's right. Well, the athletic club's still there. It's just not tell anymore.
My dad used to be a member. Anyway, I digress.
No, you're right. I mean, it's not an athletic club anymore,
Correct.
to your point.
Yes. Yeah.
I always thought to kind of pay tribute to like the soccer heritage of, like for a lot of them, it's football club, right? Sure. But I thought the Indy 11, a cool name would have been the Indianapolis Athletic Club.
Yeah, that would have been awesome.
As a tribute to the history of that venue and that building. But Indy 11 definitely works.
Yes,
I'm cool with that, right? I'm definitely cool with that. If you're just joining us, Eddie?
Where have you been?
I'm working over here.
Was it yesterday or 2 days ago that I did my line and Eddie said, actually, I'd like to be the one to say that each time you asked?
It was this week.
It was yesterday. It was yesterday.
Okay, now what I'm doing is I took the golf ball. I put the tee in the ground. I put it there. I handed the club to Eddie, and then he looked at me and said, what am I supposed to do with this?
I'm working over here. I'm sorry.
What are you working on?
I'm working on a Rick Mount post for the website. Is that okay?
Okay, which leads to this point. If you're just joining us.
Where have you been?
Thank you. Actually, that's what we were just going to ask you.
I've been right here.
The Rick Mount interview will re-air at 2:30 because Rick Mount was on. We talked about a number of things. We just ran it an hour ago. We just talked to him, wrapped it up about 40 minutes ago. But, I know that people come in and out when it comes to radio listening, and I thought it was – I don't know. I could be wrong in this. I don't know that Rick Mount had been asked about Zach Edey breaking his scoring record. I could be wrong. Surely he has been, but, he's a pretty private guy. But he was excited about Purdue. He was enjoyable to listen to in his recollections of the 1969 Final Four run for the Boilermakers. And he was engaging. And I also asked Rick Mount, who he thinks is the greatest shooter he has seen in the last 50 years of watching basketball, and who is the greatest shooter on the planet. Because many would say Rick Mount. But I asked Rick Mount, and you will want to hear his answer. Also tonight, Indiana State going to be at Hinkle taking on Seton Hall for the NIT Championship. And, Jimmy, to your point, I don't know if it's because of the venue and the proximity for one of the teams or just the fact that Indiana State's in it. But in a lot of areas, this does feel like an NIT title game that has like a little more oomph because of the fact that Indiana State is kind of the national face now for tournament selection screw-up, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the poster child, has been for a while when you have the NCAA in your own backyard, but especially so when it impacts a state school. We talked about it earlier in the program, and we said it in our reaction shows after the committee made their decision. I don't know how you could feel anything but shame and just utter feelings of we got it wrong than by watching the first half of that Colorado State-Virginia game, and you're seeing, 14, 16 points, somewhere around there, put up by the Cavaliers. And to see Indiana State kind of left out in the cold. Good look. Indiana State, I don't think ever would have actually done this. It was never reported they were going to do this, but I'm just going to give them the praise for it anyway. Good for Indiana State for taking that and still going to compete in the NIT. Because a lot of schools, especially in today's era of college basketball, view the NIT as an afterthought. And if you miss the big one, why would we do anything else to be a part of more basketball in a different tournament? That's not the way Indiana State operates. Good for them for accepting the invitation. They were number one seed within the way the NIT field was made up, and they've looked great. Have had a couple of, close calls. That Cincinnati game was, right down to the end as things went there. I mean, it was an incredible run for the Sycamores to this point. But, Jake, as we've emphasized it, and I'm going to borrow Rick Mount's line, and you'll hear this again at 2:30. Especially in the NIT, nobody but the fans of said team remember you if you're the runner-up.
You're right.
Close things out, cut down the nets tonight, baby.
Many people remember the champion of 1983. And speaking of miracle runs, our next guest was the captain on one for North Carolina State. He is still working with the Wolfpack and can give us perspective on the redo, if you will, of miracle runs for the Wolfpack that has now led North Carolina State into the Final Four against Purdue. Derek Whittenburg is next.
Texting enrolls you in recurring automated marketing text messages. Consent not required to purchase.
That's how it sounded when Derek Whittenberg hoisted up kind of a prayer that Lorenzo Charles ended up dunking and allowing Jim Valvano to run around. We anticipate Derek Whittenberg joining us here in just a minute. Again, he is now the athletic director for community relations and student support at North Carolina State University. And maybe he's got called into a meeting, Jimmy. It happens, right?
Yeah, it does. And I will say, I mentioned this earlier in the show, but if you've not seen it, or if you're just looking for something to, I guess maybe if you're not if you're a Purdue fan, because you're not trying to rep the Wolfpack this weekend, I get it. But if you're looking for something to fill the time over the day and a half between when the national semifinal occurs, go on ESPN Plus or go on, wherever, YouTube, and find it. The 30 for 30 documentary came out about 11 years ago now, Survive in Advance, which tells the story of that 1983 championship team. It tells about Derek Whittenberg, Lorenzo Charles, the two of them completely intertwined and connected with one another forever. He acknowledges that. In fact, it's in the first scene of the documentary when he's at Lorenzo Charles' funeral, and he's speaking on, behalf of that connection they've had. Moments in sports, moments in life. There are certain things that will, Jake, indelibly unite you and connect you for all time. And that specific play, even when they've both passed, I know it's Charles that has passed and Whittenberg is still alive and well, but long when we're all gone, when you're still talking about college basketball in some capacity or sports in some capacity, that is one of the most iconic moments in the history of the tournament. And that is a moment of, whether it was a pass or a three-pointer. I know they've joked about it in the years since, but that play itself of the long three by Whittenberg and then Charles slamming it home to knock out Sly Famajama, I mean, it was incredible, right?
Do you in any way, shape, or form worry that they are, again, like a team of destiny? Because didn't you kind of expect like the bubble to burst by now for North Carolina State?
Yes, multiple times.
And is it possible they just figured something out just in terms of the way that they're operating offensively?
Look, they definitely have offensively, but even more so defensively. And look, I Purdue's region, as things played out, and I know that they wouldn't have faced NC State in their region based on the selection committee, the way things went, but I felt like Purdue could get out. I did pick ultimately in my bracket, which doesn't matter. It's been dead forever, right? But I picked Tennessee in that Elite Eight matchup. Thought that maybe Dalton Connect would be a little bit too much for them, but here they are now. And you look at potential matchups, and Purdue fans, I'm sure we're doing this throughout the tournament, but who's going to come out of the other side? Who are you going to meet in the semifinal? I thought they matched up pretty well with Duke. Filipowski didn't do anything for me in terms of what he could have or could not have done to Zach Edey, but the Blue Devils did have some solid guards. And one thing that NC State has done, not just the entire tournament, but specifically against Duke, when it's a trip to the Final Four on the line against one of the most prestigious programs in the sport, they limited them from beyond the arc. They limited them from the field. Like, they had a bad offensive day, did the Duke Blue Devils. And we just saw, even though it didn't matter because Zach Edey's inhuman, we just saw a tough play or a tough stretch of shooting from Purdue against Tennessee, and it didn't matter because Zach Edey was enough. If NC State's able to force another off night, and I don't think they will, again, I'm picking Purdue. I think Purdue's going to cover and win comfortably. But if NC State is able to hang around and have another off shooting night forced by their opponent, in this case Purdue, it all turns to that Zach Edey-DJ Burns matchup. And is he enough, even though he's still undersized by height, but sized enough in terms of strength and size? Does that become the true signature matchup of this game, and it all comes down to which big man outplays the other?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's hard to think that they're going to be able to contend with Edey, right? Because I don't know, and you tell me if you disagree, but like it doesn't feel like Carolina State's bigs have, exceptional mobility, right?
And
quickness.
Eddie pointed this out to me yesterday, and I'm not trying. I know we're trying to still get Derek Whittenberg, but I'll paraphrase what Eddie mentioned. DJ Burns has not played the type of minutes per game that Zach Edey has. He's right around 29, 30 a game. So even if Burns isn't in foul trouble, and he is by far their de facto big man, he has captivated the country. That type of situation with his size and his stamina and where he's been in short bursts has been the key to NC State's run. That has been the aspect of just unguardability that you've seen at times when Zach Edey's been in the post. That's been there for DJ Burns. And if he's, Eddie, even able to be out of the game, not for fouls, but for rest at any point in time, that's a win for Purdue because I don't see anywhere else that they can hope to neutralize Edey.
100% agree with you there. And you look at DJ Burns, 6'9", 275, in the minutes that he's played so far in the NCAA tournament, like I mentioned to you yesterday after the show, 16, 42 in that overtime game against Oakland, 27 against Marquette, and then 29 against Duke.
Yeah, to bring you in, with that, Jake, if Burns is out, whether it's fouls or whether it's rest, those are the areas where Purdue has to maximize the offense, especially down low to Edey, because Burns is really the only hope they have to minimize him in any way, just because of what he brings to the table.
The part of me just thinks you got to maybe the game plan is you just let Edey get his 40. If that makes sense.
I've thought that for most of the season. Yeah.
Joining us now on the program, as we talked about, he was one of the heroes of the 1983 North Carolina State Cinderella run that is being matched now, perhaps by this team. Derek Whittenburg joins us on the program. And Derek, I appreciate the time. I'll get right to it by asking this. Do you feel like you're living the dream all over again? This feels externally very similar to your guys' 83 run. Does it feel the same now when you're watching it this close?
Oh, absolutely, guy. How ironic you guys calling me on the anniversary of our championship, April 4th, when we won it 41 years ago. And we're talking about the team in 24 and their incredible one. Listen, if we don't win the ACC tournament 41 years ago, 3 games, we're not in the tournament. This team had to win 5 games in a row in the ACC tournament to get there, and it's an incredible run. Now they're 9 games in a row. Unbelievable. And never thought in my lifetime I'd see it, but I'm enjoying it, man. I love the ride. Being back at my alma mater as the associate athletic director and ambassador, it's been great, man. I've enjoyed the run.
What are your thoughts on Purdue?
I think they're more than just Edey. I think that they got a solid team. You don't get to the Final Four without having a solid team. So obviously they got a great player in Edey in there. It's hard to handle, but I think that their guard play, the other players in their system, I think they're good. They're a solid team, and our philosophy is this: one player can't beat you. Let's worry about the other guys, because the other guys are very dangerous and capable as well.
Derek, I know it's not a perfect one-for-one comparison because you had to face this man multiple times in conference and then in the ACC tournament and then again in the regional final. But is there something poetic and has you pinching yourself for the fact that this NC State team also has to go through, in all likelihood, a back-to-back National Player of the Year in the same way you guys did a 3-time National Player of the Year in Ralph Sampson?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Just a lot of similarities. But what I like about this team is that nobody thought they would be there. I'm not even sure they thought they was going to be there. But that's the beauty of sports and all these analysts. You hear these guys making all these predictions. That's one thing in sports you cannot do. You got to wait and see what happens, because nobody gave this team a chance. And kudos to Coach Keats and his staff and these kids. They persevered, man, and nobody gave them a chance. And they're here, and once you get to the Final Four, as you remember when we did it, anybody can win at any big game.
Derek, when I think back, Derek Whittenburg is our guest from North Carolina State. Of course, the Wolfpack taking on Purdue in the Final Four. Going back to your 83 team, and I know a lot has been said about this, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to let our listeners know in the fact that it almost seems in hindsight, sometimes in hindsight you look back at stories and you go, it ended the way it was supposed to end. And with what ultimately, we learned about the spirit, and you guys knew it, but we didn't, right? The spirit and the energy of Jim Valvano, the camaraderie of your group, and just all of it, and the bond that you guys probably still have. And then, of course, the passing of Lorenzo Charles. What did that group mean to you guys, and how much was brotherhood and leadership of Jim Valvano as much a part of it as the X's and O's of hitting shots?
Well, that's the key. It's the connection from the coach to the players is imperative, and some coaches have it, and some coaches don't. And Jim Valvano was a man of personality. He really cared about his players, and he also trusted his players, and we in turn trusted him. So the brotherhood we built throughout not just after during the championship, but after the championship, how we've connected and stayed together and experienced. It's one thing in sports. You experience something like this, it's once in a lifetime experience that people will remember for the rest of your life. I mean, I never thought we'd see this again, and now the 24 team is doing their thing, but people are still talking about the 1983 championship, and which is incredible. And now these kids are part of history. They're part of NC State athletic history. They're part of North Carolina history. They're part of college basketball history, and they're part of the ACC history. So this is something that nobody can take away from them, and it's going to stay with them for the rest of their lives.
NC State legend Derek Whittenburg is our guest, member of the 1983 national champion Wolfpack team. Derek, you also executive produced one of my favorite 30 for 30, Survive and Advance. 11 years ago is when that document about the togetherness of that team. It's a very powerful 30 for 30 across the board, and right out of the gate, it hits you with you speaking at the funeral of your friend and teammate Lorenzo Charles, and you telling the rest of your Wolfpack teammates, or you guys getting together and saying, hey, if we don't get together and see each other at least once a year, we're only going to be doing it at events like this. Does the pack still get together every year? I know it's documented well that you did during the documentary, but has that still been a tradition the last 10 years, you guys getting together?
Oh, absolutely. And we're going as far as that. Now we got a group text. The guys constantly talk every day. Now, I'm not an everyday talker, but our guys are communicating every day. That's the beauty and the power of social media and technology, that now we can basically connect every day. But we're still getting together. We just celebrated last year our 40th anniversary of our championship. So we make a point to get together every year, at least once, to see each other, to pay homage, and because this is once lifetime run, and you got to cherish that, and it's a lifelong bond that we've created with each other, and a lot of respect and honor. That's what you learn about being a part of great teams, and we certainly are humbled and honored to be a part of it.
Derek, since it was 41 years ago today, and since many like myself had a bedtime and couldn't stay up late since it was in the Mountain Time Zone in Albuquerque, Gary Bender was on the call for CBS television. The clock's running down. You guys are moving the ball around the perimeter. You know you need to get a shot. Here's what I want to do for you, Derek Whittenburg. I'm going to play for you. You've only heard it 15,000 times, but I'm going to play for you that last 15 seconds. I want you to listen to it and then tell us what immediately floods back, not only of your memories in the moment, but your memories now of hearing this yet once again. Go ahead.
It's down to 7 seconds. You can see the time. Whittenburg. Oh, it's a long ways. It's in. They won it. On the dunk.
Right before that, the ball was nearly stolen. That pushed you back to about 35 feet where you had to hoist that shot. Your reaction just in hearing that once again and feeling that moment again.
Well, one thing about basketball, it's a reaction game, not a thinking game. So with 7 seconds left, when you see that ball, you have a clock in your head. As time and score, we learned that. And I know that I had to get it up there. So to make it clear to everybody, even 41 years ago, that was a pass. That
was a heck of a pass.
It's a heck of a pass. I got a book coming out in 2 or 3 weeks called "The Shot Heard Around the World: How I Went from the Playground in the White House," and I illustrate that whole journey in terms of my eyes and how it looks from my perspective. And it's going to be different than a documentary, but it's going to be a more story about my Whittenburg name and my family and all the people that helped me along the way. And some great stories, some great photographs in the book. It's going to be hot. And I just enjoyed. I talked earlier about the total experience of a college athlete. You get the opportunity. I'm a first-generation graduate. I was the first in my family to get a college scholarship. I was the first to get a scholarship and go to a school at that magnitude, at that level. I came out a better person, and they end up winning the national championship. You know, what more can you ask for in one experience? So I got the total college experience at NC State. That's why I'm back here, to see kids like this. Our women's basketball team go to the Final Four. You know, we won 3 national championships in cross country, won the swimming championship. I mean, we got so many great things going on at NC State. This is just the icing on the cake what these 2 basketball programs are doing. But I want to tell the story about why college is still a great experience, the total experience for an athlete. It's not just about transfer portal. It's not just about NIL. It's the total experience of getting a great education, meeting great people, lifelong relationships, and maybe one day you get the chance to put that banner up.
Now, Derek, tell me the name of the book that's coming out again.
It's called The Shot Heard Around the World, How I Went from the Playground to the White House.
Now, shouldn't that be called The Assist Heard Around the World?
Well,
who's your editor?
You got to read the book to get more knowledge on it. Okay,
all right,
you got
fair enough. Fair enough. I like that. Hey, before we let you go, 2 other things I want to ask. Number one, you know, Benny Anders is the guy that deflected the pass that was going to you, that caused you to have to, we'll say, give the assist to Charles from so far out. Do you have any relationship with those Houston guys, or do you ever, you know, good-natured ribbing about what could have been?
Oh, absolutely. When we did the documentary, we called up Elijah Wan, and he was great. He was great. He was on the film. He was outstanding. And now Clyde is still kind of hurt a little bit, you know, because Terry Gannon tackled him at the end of the game, and it should have been a foul on Terry, but he still remembers Terry Gannon about that tackle at the end of the game. But I told Clyde and Elijah when I said, listen, guys, y'all we won this championship, okay, and then it inspired you guys to go to Houston and win 2 world championships. So that actually helped you guys. They didn't kind of understand that, but that's what I had to tell them. I said it really helped you guys. But no, those guys really, they've been great. They really have been great, and I've talked to Clyde several times, and he's a good sport about it.
Derek, we did not get Derek Whittenburg of North Carolina State is our guest. We have not gotten the chance, I guess, for as long a period of time to get to know Lorenzo Charles, because he was tragically killed in a bus crash, 13 years ago. So I wanted to give you the opportunity. What can you tell us about him as a man and teammate?
Wonderful kid. A lot, not as boisterous as DJ Burns, but son of a quiet personality. Loved people, had a big smile, had loads of potential as a player, and just blossomed at the right time. He's a sophomore, but he was really coming on. And, the next year, the following year, when he's a junior, he really stepped it up. But tragic loss for us. But, we remember him every day. My life is always going to be connected with Lorenzo Charles. As long as I'm on this earth, that Lorenzo Charles, that last play, everybody remember that. Every day of my life since it's happened, somebody's talked about that play with myself and Lorenzo Charles.
I guess sometimes in life, when you've got to make a desperate pass, you got to have a friend to be able to turn it into a great moment, right? That's kind of what you learn from that.
Absolutely. Hey, guys, when I do my book signing in Indianapolis, I want you guys to be there. It's going to be great. I got some neat photographs. I got some great stuff in this book. I tell some unbelievable stories about life and basketball and leadership and teamwork. It's going to be an incredible book, guys.
Now, Derek, we look forward to it. We'll take you up on it. We'll stay in contact. I'll leave you with this. I was in the pit in Albuquerque. I told this story on the air, but about 5 years ago, a buddy of mine and I were going to be in Albuquerque, and I said, I got to go to the pit and see where the moment was, right? So we go out there, and a guy from New Mexico basketball brings out a ball, and I reenacted the shot. And I got to tell you, I was so proud of myself, and I think I called you out on like Facebook Live because I actually hit the shot. And then I realized, Derek, that the shot that I was taking with one person there filming me on Facebook and the shot that you were taking were two totally different atmospheres. So advantage you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you got the better end of it there, right? It's easy to hit when there's nobody in the gym is what I'm getting at. You know what I mean?
Well, a lot of people running around, was running around during that time talking about Whittenburg for three, making some 3-point shots. So, listen, don't remember me always as the guy that made the pass. Remember, I was the top scorer in the history of the tournament that year. I was in the top 5 in scoring. So, I did make a few baskets, too, now.
And you did have the most important assist in the history of the tournament. All right, lastly, Derek, for North Carolina State to beat Purdue, they're going to have to do what?
Guard play. I think DJ Burns and Big Edie that can equally kind of wash itself out. Both of them got the ability to score inside, but at the end of the day, guys, it's going to be guard play. I think Purdue's point guard is really underrated. I think he's pretty good. And when Big Edie comes up to that screen, whether we can handle that and keep that kid from knocking. But I think their other team is solid. It's sort of almost like people are not paying attention to Purdue. I think they're better than what people think. And we're this team we got nothing to lose, and everybody's expecting them to win. But I feel a little hunger about Purdue, too, because, this is their last chance. And I watched Edie's interview talking about how people passed him up and didn't think he was real good. So he's got a little fire in his eyes. And then, we got a lot of confidence. So it's going to be an interesting game. I think it's a good matchup for us. And if DJ Horn can get going, we got to make some shots from the outside. It's going to be hard to get second shots with the big fella down there. So we're going to have to be hot from the outside.
Derek, it's been a pleasure. Appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you when you come to Indy and helping you out with the book. And in the meantime, enjoy celebrating 41 years of the anniversary of a national championship and the pass heard around the world.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Derek Whittenburg of North Carolina State University. Pacers last night not as impressive against the Brooklyn Nets. We will take a look at that next.
Spring in Indy, and if you
Hey, Jake. Great interviews today. The Rocket was always great, but Whittenburg was awesome. DJ Burns is a 13-5 guy versus Edey. I don't think that's a wash. That's probably a fair statement, but Burns is playing well for sure.
And I mean, I would argue if there's anybody that would have a chance at slowing him down to this point in the tournament, this is the most intriguing matchup Edey's had.
That's fair. Eddie, all of the interviews that we've done, Rick Mount, which we're going to replay in 30 minutes, and Derek Whittenburg can be found where?
If you go to the podcast center at 1075thefan.com, there's a banner right at the top of the screen. You just click that. It will take you for all the shows, and you'll just have to scroll down to Query and Company. Additionally, since this was a Purdue-led interview, there is a story in the conglomerate on the homepage of the 5. It has all the interviews that each show has done. So there's Matt Painter, amongst others, that are on there as well at 1075thefan.com.
Okay, very well. And you got a hold of Tony?
I always got a hold of Tony,
He's going to join us next. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right, Tony East, talk about the Pacers and Brooklyn next.
The Ride with JMV.
Fall in Brooklyn last night.
Thank you. Well done.
115-111 the
Such
final.
a suck up.
The Nets get the job done. And unfortunately, it also knocks the Pacers out of the 6th spot if the season ended today based on win percentage. Miami Heat now overtake them on the 6th seed. Pacers being a part of the play-in if things ended today. He covered the action last night. Joining us now, one of our favorites. We talk to him weekly. He's Tony East. You can find his work on Sports Illustrated, Forbes as well, and of course on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Tony, always good to catch up with you. And as we dive right into things, when you look back at last night's loss to the Nets, How much of it can we read into of, man, shorthanded without Miles Turner, his presence was missed last night?
That's a factor for sure. I mean, the game they played Monday, they were up 29 in the first half when Turner was playing, and he was cleaning up a lot of their mistakes, right? They were giving up drive after drive to the Nets in that first half, and he had 5 blocks and made a bunch of great plays. But they didn't have him last night in the second quarter. Nets were making drive after drive, and there was no one to bail them out at all. They were scoring at the rim. They were spraying it to the right shooters. Noah Clowney got hot. Cam Thomas got going. Dennis Schroeder got going. And they needed him. They didn't even play that well in the second half Monday without him after he hurt the finger. But he is saving them from problems that are happening elsewhere, right? The problem wasn't necessarily that he wasn't playing, although he would have helped. They were just getting destroyed by drives over and over, straight line drives right to the basket. We're beating guys all night last night, and especially in that second quarter when they gave up 42 and gave away their 14-point lead in, half of a quarter. It was killing them. They couldn't stop anybody, and they weren't getting the same level of help around the basket as they were 2 days earlier. It really hurt them. I don't know how much he could have helped them offensively with 2 fingers stuck together, but his defensive presence alone would have helped in a way, and they needed him last night. They didn't have him.
Tony, I was mentioning this earlier. To me, the thing, kind of the last step, I guess, for this Pacers group, like if we knew last year this was like a 3-year rebuild, right? And maybe it's been accelerated by the emergence of Halliburton, the acquisition of Siakam. So maybe from a roster standpoint, it's pretty close to what we're going to see here for a couple of years. But my observation, and I want you to add to this or disagree if you'd like, is kind of the last piece for them is just to learn consistency. And one of the real challenges of the NBA is winning every game as opposed to just elevating in the games that are going to be a challenge for you. And this team has yet to master that. Your thoughts?
I agree, and I think that kind of comes with the makeup of their team, right? What I mean by that is, top 2 offense this season in the league, but a bottom, I think, 6 now defense. That opens you up to a lot of inconsistent results, whether that's, this week, I mean, smoking the Lakers last week, beating the Nets handily, and then losing to the Nets, whether that's their Bulls loss, their Hornets. I mean, we've all known their terrible losses all season. Like, other teams can just have good nights against them, and then their margin for error is way smaller. And that's my running theory of why they're so inconsistent this season, because all the other teams that have so many losses that their fan base would consider unacceptable, right? The Kings, who lost to the Hornets and Wizards and Blazers all at home, and the Mavs have a bunch of crummy losses. The Hawks are terrible against under 500 teams. They all are the same way. They all have really good offenses and really bad defenses. And so it opens you up to a bad offensive night or a decent offensive night from the other team. You can lose. Your consistency is not there, whereas defense travels a little better. And it's why a team like the Magic, who are amazing on defense but not so good on offense, really clean up against crummy teams, right? They're not so good against the top teams. They don't have as high of a ceiling, but their floor is really high. So to put it simply, I agree with you 100%. Their consistency is all over the place. And I think the biggest reason for that is because their defense comes and goes. And there are nights like last night where even for just 15 minutes, their defense is awful and it's worse than the league level, and it costs them a game they should win. They can't have that, but it's what their team is right now.
Pacers beat writer for SI, Tony East, with us. Tony, I feel like you were, of all that cover the team, probably the most level-headed in terms of the struggles that Tyrese Halliburton had over the last month or so. He has another, at least in terms of on paper, solid night last night. I mean, he's only 35% from 3, but still he's knocking in 5 of them instead of a 1-for-8 performance that we've grown, unfortunately, accustomed to throughout March. He dishes it well and finishes with 24, and that's kind of stacking good performances from him from beyond the arc. From your evaluation of that run, of what we remember, or the struggles of that run in March to where he's at now, is he somewhere in the middle from where he was at the start of the year? Is he just getting more comfortable, as Jake has pointed out a couple times, with Pascal Siakam and the offense ramping back up to where it was? What would you point to Tyrese Halliburton rediscovering his shot here in the stretch run?
Yeah, I think figuring things out with Pascal certainly helps. Like it's not lost on me. Halliburton wasn't even shooting, but when they made their big comeback last night in the fourth to actually regain the lead, they went to just Halliburton Siakam 2-man game like 4 times in a row. Like that just works and can generate a good shot for them. I think a little bit is finding his joy and confidence again, right? He had that game in Detroit where he played very well, and he only took 3 threes that night. He made one of them, but he just found other ways to be effective and realized that there are other things he can do. He's still playing well. He just needs to find a way to settle in for the shot. And, once you've just one game of seeing it, or once you rediscover your kind of purpose as a shooter, it can all come back. And he had that game against Golden State where that happened, and you've kind of seen it flow ever since. It hasn't been as good as it was early in the season, of course. There's still some games where he doesn't take the insane one-legged ones that he was, drilling for the entire month of November, it felt like. But certainly some growth there in terms of how he's fitting with the new look of the team, his health, his confidence, his joy for the game. You've seen dunks in each of the last 3 games from him, which I think that I can't remember him dunking 3 games in a row covering him before. So a lot going better for him. The Pacers just needed to lead to consistent wins because every game is critical for them now.
Where would you assess Jalen Smith's performance in the rare instances this year, and it's most notable last night, where he is called up into the starting role when Miles is not available?
Yeah, there's 2 factors of that. Like, when Miles isn't available specifically, they're 2 and 3 in those 5 games Miles hasn't played this season, and it's just way different, right? What he can provide versus what Miles Turner provides is way different. I believe this was the first time that he started with Siakam this season. I might have one of those wrong, but when he was starting at the 4, like, you saw how that helped the team and what his role was made a lot of sense. And when he's with the second unit, he has been really helpful. But just what Miles Turner gives the starters versus what Jalen Smith can do just isn't the same, right? Even if Smith has become more comfortable at the 5 this year. And last night he had a couple threes that were just, not what the team needed at the time, and they didn't go in. Obviously, that's a big factor here. But he hasn't been as effective in that role, and there could be a number of reasons for that. But they just don't have the same skill set, particularly on the defensive end, and his rebounding is valuable, but you have to force misses to get boards and all sorts of stuff like that. 2 and 3 speaks for itself, but it hasn't been the same this year as it has been in other seasons for him as a starter. He's been better as a 4 as a starter and 5 with the second unit. So when Turner's out, it's a big loss.
Tony, I'm going to rinse and repeat. Tony East is our guest talking about the Pacers. I'm going to rinse and repeat a topic that we have talked about over the last couple of years, seemingly, and especially this time of year. I think it was 2 years ago. But as his number gets called upon and Jalen Smith continues to play, whether it be in a fill-in role when Miles Turner's hurt or is a complimentary role, whatever it might be, is he starting to potentially show and price himself beyond what Indiana is going to be able to do to retain him as part of their long-term vision?
Oh, yeah, especially as we get later into the season. It's been interesting because post-trade deadline, the 3 hasn't really been there for him the way it was early in the season when he couldn't miss. And I don't want to ascribe – like, he was hurt for a while with that back injury, so I don't want to – it could be a slump, it could be injury-related, who knows. But especially last night, like, if just one of those went in that he took, that they probably win. So, the shooting hasn't been there as much. So the question with him becomes – what does he want, right? And what is the value of a backup center in the NBA? He does have age on his side, so I think lots of teams would be willing to figure out what that is. But can he find a starting role somewhere else, or can he find an opportunity with more minutes because Miles Turner's still going to be, around next year for the Pacers? I think those are maybe bigger factors than the money for him with that player option because, especially early in the season, he was playing great. He was totally worth more than his money. But backup center is, there's plenty of them around the league. Some of them aren't even in the league. Cody Zeller, not on a team for almost all last season, for example. Isaiah Jackson's still on the Pacers. So it'll be interesting to see what his kind of summer looks like. I think it might depend more on his goals than the Pacers' goals. But, we saw early in the season how important he can be when he's playing at his absolute best. So, the playoffs could be a factor, too. If he has a great postseason, that could change what he thinks about his future and what the Pacers need to defend. It's all still in the air to me.
Tony, what winds up being the ultimate role come postseason, play in or play off for Doug McDermott? Because it feels like the minutes fluctuation is at some point either lineups or matchup based, depending on the opponent, when he gets the increased role. And there's other times where it's just a sparing 5-6 minutes a night. I know when the trade happened, it was just a veteran shooter potentially to add in to lessen the blow of losing an in the league, great shooter in Buddy Hield. What winds up being his postseason role when that time arrives here in the next week or so?
I think we've gotten hints in the last week or so that it won't exist, that his role might be nothing come that time. Last night against the Nets, he played in the first half for 6 minutes. They lost those minutes by 4. That was in the midst of a really crummy stretch for the team. He did not play in the second half. They played the Lakers at home. last Friday. He played for a minute and a half in the first half of that game, did not return all night. They played the Bulls right before that. Jarris Walker was ahead of him in the rotation. Now, Jarris did not have a good game, and they went back to McDermott in that game, and he got some garbage time minutes. But we've seen in 3 of the last 4 games, his role has been all over the place and not particularly big, And since returning from that injury on March 20th, he's had 3 performances with under 6 minutes of play in the rotation, twice under 12 minutes. And those under 12-minute games were blowouts where he was in late. So his role is already the smallest. He's as the 12th man, and Jarris having that ascent on the road trip kind of tweaks things. But it seems like when these games get tight or they get to a point where the Pacers say, we've got something that's working with Ben Shepherd or Aaron Nesmith starting LeBron or whatever, they don't turn to him very much. So I think it could continue this way where maybe he plays like spot minutes in the first half. Maybe he makes a couple threes like he did against the Nets on Monday. But as the game progresses and they kind of figure out what's the best rotation for them on the wing or what do they need. Last night it was, Ben Shepherd when Aaron Nesmith was in foul trouble. He doesn't play that much. So I think come playoff time when things really tighten and they, the idea would be to play Aaron Nesmith 35 minutes a game. The answer might be none at all. It might be like 2 or 3 minutes here or there, but it seems like it's trending towards a no role for him in the postseason.
Tony, Rick Carlisle recently passed, I believe, Red Auerbach, right, on the all-time wins list?
Correct.
For coaches?
Yes, on Monday. Yep.
Over the course of this year, how many different coaches has Rick Carlisle been? And by that, I don't mean that flippantly. I mean, do you believe that Rick Carlisle began the year and said, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to play, or has he himself had to adjust and reinvent styles over the course of the year?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what he's very good at, right? I think that when he got brought here was one of the things he, was praised for is that he gets a lot out of players and figures out the right role for them. And we've seen that as the season has progressed, right? Early in the season, he identified what Tyrese Halliburton could be and built a team that could play like him. And then they realized when they were 500 and around Christmas that they needed to tweak some things, find a way to play better defense, whether that's with lineup, whether that's with strategy. And that team was good until Halliburton got hurt. And then there was a trade, and they had to figure out how to work Siakam in. And then there was another trade, and they had to play Ben Shepherd more. And then Mathurin got hurt. Like, he has had to continually adjust with what the team is, and they still have a top 2 offense in the league. Their defense has gotten better throughout the season. They've exceeded my expectations in terms of wins already. And I think that's one of his strengths as a coach, and I think you see that tactical side of him almost every game because they come out at halftime. They're one of the better teams in the league in those third quarters. Him and Halliburton are just really strong at reading a game and adjusting and figuring out how they can overcome whatever challenges the team is dealing with. And so in a lot of games, you see them come out of the second half and be, a far superior team than their opponent. They're 7th in the league in third quarter net rating this season. All the rest of the teams above them are very good teams. And so I think that's where he's shined. And just because of the dynamics of the season with injuries, with trades, with a young team being better than a lot of people thought, he's kind of had to tweak who they are every couple weeks. And I think for better or worse, that's worked out for them and given them more looks they can go to if they need to make adjustments in the playoffs. But they got to get there first. That's his challenge for the last 5.
Tony East is our guest, covers the Pacers for Sports Illustrated, as well as you hear him on the Locked On Podcast Network for Locked On Pacers. Tony, I tweeted this last night. I didn't dive into the archives for it. Just did it off of memory. And I don't mean to fully skip across the matchup against the Thunder tomorrow night because if the Pacers drop that puts them in further trouble. But for the sake of argument, let's say they win. And Gainbridge Fieldhouse likely rocking late Sunday afternoon, 5 o'clock tip time, I believe, when they welcome in the Miami Heat into town. Biggest regular season game, I said, since the Oladipo era. Would you argue with that?
No, definitely I would not argue with that. I mean, last year they got eliminated with 10 days to go. And I guess, Jimmy, can I add an asterisk to that?
Absolutely.
Can I say non-in-season tournament regular season game?
Yeah, fair. Because those were fun. Those were electric. Okay, that's a good point.
I forgot about those myself. But, I mean, they haven't been, postseason bound since the Oladipo era, and they had those games in the bubble that were critical to them rising the standings before Sabonis had to leave, and they didn't even have a chance in that postseason. So, yeah, I think it's pretty easy to say that's their biggest regular season game in terms of what it could mean and impact since that era. All 5 of these last games are. I mean, really, there's a unique scenario where they don't quite, but they still kind of control their own destiny for the 6th seed because of that Miami game. But they got to win it. If they lose it, they lose that tiebreaker. They lose a lot of 3-team tiebreakers. They obviously fall in the standings. Joel Embiid is back. It is impossible to overstate how big that game is for the Pacers. Miami coming in on a 3rd and 4 nights as well. Like, they have to take advantage of it. And I thought they would be up for the task given how they'd played in their last 7 games going into last night, but then they fell flat on their face again. So it's hard to say what they really are at this point.
But go ahead. Jim.
I was going to say, as for the Thunder tomorrow night, Tony, they still very much have the 1 seed on the table. What do you envision from that matchup with so much at stake for both teams, albeit in different trajectories of their conference standings?
Yeah, the Thunder have not lost 3 games in a row all season, which is bad news for the Pacers because they enter today having lost 2 in a row. But their situation's unique. They're fighting for the 1 seed. Minnesota and Denver are playing very well right now in a game ahead of them. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's banged up. Jalen Williams is banged up. That's been hurting them recently as they go through this road trip. And I think this is their last game of a long road trip, which can be tiring for any team. Not to give the Pacers any sort of out. They need to win this game for whatever reason. They have 1 more road game after this Pacers game, but they have not been playing their best. Pacers did beat them with Shai available, but they're fighting like crazy. Every team the Pacers play, except for the Raptors, the rest of the season probably has some stakes. We'll see about the Hawks for the last game of the season. So they're not going to get into those easy end of season like the Thunder play, the Hornets on Sunday, for example, easy ones where the team has nothing to play for. They're going to get some tough opponents with some tough punches, and the Thunder starts that tomorrow.
And, Miami does too, right? Because that's the thing. After that Miami game, that game is only as big as how those 2 teams then close after it, right? And for Miami, they also have Atlanta in play right after that, I'm not mistaken. And Atlanta, that could determine actually, Miami could turn around and then do the Pacers a favor, weirdly enough. Yeah. Because if they eliminate Atlanta, then you got a totally different team you're finishing out with, right?
Yeah, the Hawks are 10th right now, and they can actually play for home court in that 9-10 game with the Bulls. So what the Pacers want is the Hawks to lose a bunch in the coming weeks and the Bulls to win a bunch, both because the Bulls play the Knicks 3 times still this season, which is crazy, and the Hawks could be playing for nothing on that last night of the season because the Heat's last 2 games are at home against the Raptors. If you haven't checked on the Raptors recently, I can't blame you. They've lost 15 games in a row. I don't think those are going to be difficult games for the Heat. So Pacers need to clean up that Heat game and hope Miami loses pretty much every other non-Hawks game they play this season because here come the Sixers with Joel Embiid. The teams in front of them are playing decently well. I mean, it's all very convoluted and confusing. Big game tonight as the Heat play the Sixers in Miami. It's a huge one for the Pacers.
Pacers just want to avoid the Bulls, baby. Avoid the Bulls, Tony. That's the theme, right?
You know what's funny is the way I think about the play-in and a best of 1, I would want to play the team that I think has the least ability to go off with a hot shooting game. And in my head, that is the Bulls. They're not a good shooting team, so I feel pretty good about my chances if I play the Bulls. But they keep beating the Pacers by a healthy amount, so maybe they don't want to play the Bulls.
DeMar DeRozan existing kind of puts water on that argument for me personally.
Pacers are like, bring on the Bucks in a 7 game. Let's go.
Like in my head, I know he's not playing, so this is different. In my head, I'd rather play the Bulls than a Trae Young team in a play-in game just because Trae Young is capable of, a crazy game. Where
lightning in a bottle guy, right?
Yeah, and the Bulls don't seem to have that, but the Pacers saw DeMar DeRozan have that game against them and can't beat them at all this year. They're 1-3 against it. So the theme we're getting to is, how about just avoid the play-in if you're the Pacers? Don't even deal with it.
Tony Pepper still clipping along?
I'm not seeing her today, but yeah, she's doing her thing. She's screaming in the middle of the night to wake me up. So she's making it work.
That's Tony's 28-year-old cat. Is that right?
The bit should be now that you say 1 year older every single week that I come on until it gets too unbelievable. 22, 21, or 22.
Okay, Tony, we appreciate the time as always.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate
Tony East joining us talking about the Pacers.
Is that common, by the way? Cats screaming in the middle of the night? I'm not a cat owner. Is that?
Well, I've never been a cat owner until a year ago.
Oh, really? I didn't realize Boo was that new to the Query household. I did not know that.
Yeah, it was.
It's not a household; it's a palace. Come on now.
My apologies.
That's right.
Who's sucking up now?
Yeah, I was on my way.
That's what he's called it.
It's a terrible, terrible way to say this, but Jimmy, I was on my way because I did the morning show, and it was in the morning when I was driving to work in the dark when I hit a cat, and it was awful. I mean, I was like on my way. I had to go to work, and I mean, I hate to say this, there was no suffering for the cat. It's a terrible story,
no,
right?
That's good.
But I pulled over, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I believe it was a feral cat. I don't think it was a pet, but it was terrible. And I could not shake it. out of my head. Like, it was just awful. I mean, I did, without going into detail, I didn't just like leave the cat. I mean, you know. But anyway, I couldn't deal with it. It was terrible. So that's when I went to the Humane Society and said, do you have a cat that's been here a long time that, like, not a lot of people have come to visit? And they're like, actually, yeah, we'll show you one. He's 9, and he's a black cat. And they don't allow, apparently, adoption of black cats close to Halloween because they're afraid people are getting it for the wrong reason.
Okay.
And so, but this was in March, but he had apparently been taken to the shelter just before October. So then, anyway, he'd been there a long time. He'd been there almost a year. And so I said, all right, I'll take him. And he's lived with me ever since. And he's the best.
That's awesome.
But he doesn't whine at night. And again, they said he was 9. I think he's more like 6. But when you are asleep, if you have a cat, when you're asleep, the cat becomes concerned that, like, something's wrong with you. And so they'll, like, nudge to, like, wake, like, to make sure you're still with us. And so he does do that. Or there are times where I will wake up and he's asleep on my chest, and then suddenly my place is 400 degrees. Eddie, what about your cat?
See, my cat doesn't care about me like that. He just sleeps. He just sleeps right next to me. That's all he does. He doesn't poke my face or anything. Now, when he gets hungry, he turns into Hulk. Well, let me tell you.
Yeah.
He knocks anything that he can off of any ledge, any counter.
But cats select a person, right?
He is most definitely Olivia's cat because she got him when she used to work at Wayne TV in Fort Wayne.
Okay, because they have a person that, like, is the one that they attach to. In his case, he has no choice, right? I live by myself. So it's me and him.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this. A couple of times I've come home and checked, and the liquor cabinet looks like it might have been touched. I think Boo's drinking a little bit when I'm not
Boo
when I'm
is
not there.
yet to master the art of pouring some water in there and all.
I marked the bottles, and Boo's figured it out, right? Earlier on the program, if you're just joining us,
where have you been?
Thank you, Eddie. Rick Mount joined us on the program. Purdue was, of course, in the Final Four. Rick Mount was a junior in 1969 when the Boilers went to the Final Four. And really fun conversation, including who does he think is the greatest shooter in basketball, and his thoughts on Zach Edey becoming the all-time leading scorer in Purdue. That and so much more next.
Hey, it's JMV, and 9 years ago.
to have an introduction for our next guest. He is a basketball icon in the state of Indiana, and you will never meet, and I can tell you that as sure as today is Thursday, you will never meet anybody who saw him play that will tell you anything other than Rick Mount is the greatest shooter they have ever seen in the game of basketball. He was, of course, on the 1969 Purdue team that made the Final Four. They got all the way into, in the Final Four, the national championship game before dropping to UCLA. But Rick Mount joins us on the program now. Rick, it is a true pleasure. How are you?
Okay, Jake, how you doing?
You know what? I'm excited for Purdue. I'm excited for their fans and, just this run. Excited to talk to you as well. So let's begin with this. I mean, you are, one of the, if not the all-time great at Purdue, and now you get a chance to see your alma mater in the Final Four. First off, just your reaction about where they are now and your thoughts on the job Matt Painter's done.
Oh, Matt's a great coach, and he's done a great job bringing these guys to where they are right now. And the team is playing well. I think they got their first five, and they got Gillis, and they got Heidi, and they got Coleman at the other three spots. They got 8 guys that can play and get it done. So I think they're going to be okay.
When you look back, Rick, on your time playing for Purdue, and I had read, and I don't know if this is true or not, that you ended up at Purdue, obviously close to home, right there near Lebanon. I thought I read somewhere that maybe Miami was another school where you were thinking about going, but obviously it worked out for you at Purdue. What are your overall memories, I guess, and just your sentiments in general of being a Boilermaker?
Well, it was the fan. I remember Red Mackey. I went in and had a meeting with him on my visit, and he was the athletic director. And he's the one that started all this Purdue Mackey Arena. And it was the offices were there, but it was just a big hole, And so he says, this is my dream, Rick, and we want you to be part of it. And it turned out to be that I was part of it, and we got it going. We had the dedication game with UCLA, and we almost beat them. And there was I always remember this. Bob King was an assistant coach at Purdue, and he was downstairs on the floor. He told me this story, talking with a guy, and the guy says, I don't know if they're going to let you play, Bob, because you probably got 17,000 in there and only held 14,123. And he says, the fire marshal might shut this game down. He said, bull crap, he's sitting right over there on the front row. So they wasn't going to shut the game down. He had front row tickets, and the fans, that's where it all started with the fans, and crazy, and teams hated to come to Purdue to play because of the fans, and they were great.
Rick, what do you remember most about that run by you and the Boilermakers in '69?
Well, see, back then you only played the 32 games instead of 68 now or something like that. And we started out in the Mid-East Regional in Wisconsin, and we played Miami, Ohio, and Kentucky played Marquette. And we won, and Marquette beat up on Kentucky pretty good, but that's where it started right there, and I always remember this. You need a little luck once in a while to get that far to the final game. You got to have a little luck too. So we're playing Marquette with Al McGuire, and Al McGuire was a fiery guy. He was really fiery, and he came by George King at the half. We had him down a little bit. And I'm getting some rosin on my hand. and he turns and gets right in George King's face and says, "Now we're going to kick your ass." and George says, "You couldn't do it in the NBA. You're not going to be able to do it now." So the game was right down to the wire. It's tied up with 25 seconds to go, and Dean Meminger, you heard of that name?
Yep.
And he's got the ball. He's out there, and they're going to hold it for one. They ain't going to give us they're not going to give us a shot at it. They're going to take a shot, and if it goes in, they win, or it goes in overtime. So he shoots one from about 16 feet, comes off the rim, and big George Faber, the Faber B. Winda, that guy made millions of dollars on that. The guy's starting to put it up with 2 seconds to go, and Faber just grabbed him. This guy's got 2 shots, and I always remember this. And if he makes one of them, we lose and we go home. Right before he got the ball, the referee gave him the ball. I'm in the blockout lane. He turns to me and he says, "It's over." He's telling me it's over. So I didn't say anything to him because I want him to keep concentrating on what he just said to me, So he puts the first shot up and it hits the neck of the rim, comes off. Now I'm looking at him. I'm not saying anything to him. He won't look at me now. And the second free throw he put up was an air ball. So the game goes in overtime. And I hit that last second shot in overtime to put us in the Final Four. But, things like that, all you had to do is hit one shot, one free throw, and they beat us. But they didn't.
So, Rick, let me tell you the story George Faber told me years ago.
He lies a lot. Just remember, he lies a lot. Okay?
That's the best part about George Faber, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
His windows are a lot more clear and easy to see through than his stories, right? So,
yeah.
So, Rick, Faber tells me that in that Marquette game at Wisconsin Fieldhouse, you're in overtime. You're getting ready to George King calls a timeout. You're in the huddle. And Faber admits to me, he says, "Jake, we're walking out of that huddle, and I can barely walk straight because my knees are knocking because I'm so nervous because there's just the tension and the moment." And he said, "I feel this tug at my jersey, and I turn around, and it's Mount, and Mount says something to me." Now, I guess I'll put you on the spot. No, I take that back. I'm not going to put you on the spot by telling you I'll just tell you what he told me you said, and I want you to tell me if it's fact or fiction, but just say it's fact because it's such a great story. He said that you basically said, "Hey, Big George, you see all these people in the stands? All of them are still going to read about it in the paper in the morning because they're going to love what they're about to see." And then you went out and hit the shot. True or false?
Similar to that.
Yes.
And thing about George Faber, a guy named Thompson, you heard of that guy. He played in the ABA.
Yep.
He was on Marquette, too. Now he's got it on the wing with 25 seconds to go in the overtime. And
George Thompson, by the way. Yep.
George Thompson, yeah. And Faber's guarding him. Faber gets on his knees and steals the ball from him with about 14 seconds to go. So we got it, timeout, just like you said. And George says, "Well, we're gonna run it down to about 8 seconds, and Mount's going to get the ball and he's going to shoot it. And if he misses overtime, if he hits it, we're in the Final Four." And then I said something to George about that story he told you.
Beautiful.
And so we let it go down to about 6, and in George's cussing ways, I'm not going to say what he said, but the guy coaches told me this, that, "Damn it, they waited too long," like that. And I get the ball. Jerry Johnson sets a little pick over there, and I get off on it, and about 23-footer, and get nothing but that, and we're in the Final Four.
Rick, when you grow up in Indiana, Rick Mount is our guest. When you grow up in Indiana, there are, I think before you learn to ride a bike in this state, before you learn your ABCs, you learn two facts. The first is that Rick Mount was on the cover of Sports Illustrated in high school. Only a female swimmer had done that before as a high school athlete. And the other is that Rick Mount once in a pregame could tell that the rim was cocked and went up to the officials in Iowa and said, look, the rim's bent. And they got out a ladder and a ruler and they said, I'll be damned, he's right. How in the world could you tell that a rim was bent? And take me through that story.
Yeah, well, I've shot on so many rims, but it happened in the final. We go in on Wednesday for a shoot-around at Freedom Hall.
Yeah, it happened twice, right?
Yeah, and we go in there, and they just put the rims up. And I told George, I said, that one rim down to that north end down there is down on the right-hand side. You better tell that guy that. And he goes down and tells that guy, and the guy, and he comes back over there, and he says, he said, kiss his ass. I said, well, then kiss his ass, get his level out, and put the level on there, and it was off. So he got it straightened out, that guy, the maintenance guy, and that's how that story was, and but you've shot, I shot so many shots and millions of shots, maybe millions, that every time I'd look, I could tell it was even or what.
You guys blow away, obviously Carolina in the Final Four. You get into the national championship game against UCLA. And I'm curious for you, Rick Mount, in the years since then, how often you think about, because I know Purdue fans do, The reality is your teammate Chuck Bavis is hurt. I mean, he's your center, right? He's unavailable. Gilliam's hurt. Billy Keller's dinged up. How much do you lose sleep still to this day occasionally over what could have been if you'd been healthy?
Well, go back to that North Carolina game with Dean Smith. They come out of the ACC all hepped up, and Charlie Scott. They got Charlie Scott, a couple 7-footers and things, but in an article when we were down there, they were interviewing Gene, the coach, the North Carolina coach, and he never mentioned Purdue's name in this article. All he could talk about is how he was going to hold Lou Alcindor and what they were going to do against Lou Alcindor and all this bull crap, And how that goes, because, Keller and Gilliam and Davis and myself, we were pretty competitive. And so we come out and beat them 92-67. So that got us into the final game. When we were dinged up, Bavis got hurt in the Mid-East Regional. He tore something in his chest and cartilage or whatever it was. And Gilliam had a bad leg, and Keller had some problems, and I had a few problems. So we wasn't at full strength. And we played them out there in California, the first game of the season. They beat us 5 points out there at Pauley Pavilion. And, they beat us 1 point at Purdue. So this would be the third time we'd played them. And the bad thing about it, Jerry Johnson, he was about 6'9", weighed about 165, 175. There's no way he was going to hold Lou Alcindor away from that basket. Now, Bavis could. They always talked about Bavis. And Bavis, he kind of got the short end of the deal with us because we, with Gilliam and Keller and myself, we were perimeter offensive team, And Bavis, he scored 12 and 10, but he got kind of shortchanged a little bit. But he would have got a chance to play in the NBA, I think. So we had 4 guys that were pro players. So, anytime, and I think this team right now, Smith said it pretty well last week, we are on a mission. And I loved when he said that because we were on a mission too. We didn't talk trash. We didn't make fun of people. When we got between those lines and laced them up, we're going to beat your ass. That's what it was all about. And so, but Big Lou was in the way, and we were runner-up. And Jake, I tell you, nobody remembers who was runner-up. You got to win it, and that's what I'm saying about Purdue. If they don't win it, and if they get beaten in the championship game, they'll always say Connecticut, Connecticut, Connecticut. They won't mention Purdue's name unless you're in Mackey Arena or something like that, watching the game. So it was fun, and we went a long way, and we just didn't get it done all the way.
Rick, I know it's, obviously it's kind of apples and oranges because of so many factors, games played, years played. I mean, obviously you couldn't play as a freshman back in those days, but the reality is that Zach Edey is now statistically the leading scorer in Purdue history. His journey has been fascinating to watch. Just what is your overall reaction in seeing your record eclipsed and watching Zach Edey represent Purdue?
Well, I don't hold it against Zach Edey. He said, here's the way I feel about it, and I don't want to sound sour grapes, but apples, the oranges, yeah, but apples to apples, no. I played 72 games and had 23, and I think he went by me at 140 games. And I don't hold that against him. He set his own. What I feel, in my mind, he set his own record of 140 games. He's the leading scorer. I'm not going to, the guy's a great player, a college player, and so great. I had it for 54 years. So, and the thing is, nothing against the players that played there, but a lot of those players had a 140-game career. And I can't believe it wasn't broken before then, I'm not knocking anybody, but but I don't know. It was great, and they're on a roll. And I'll tell you one thing. I don't know if anybody can get 61, though. That's a lot of points.
And I'll tell you what, double figures for 72 consecutive games, 46 games with 30 or more for Rick Mount. Obviously a prolific career. I'm curious of this. I know you still put up shots. I know you still teach kids how to shoot the basketball. You still try to get the right fundamentals for shooters. When Rick Mount watches basketball in 2024 and looks back on since when you were playing to now, the best shooter Rick Mount has seen is who?
Me?
Yes.
I don't see anybody better than me. I hate this. I'm not being cocky. Well, I am being cocky because I could do it. But, gosh, I don't know. It's kind of I'd have to think on that a while.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of people have to think on that a while, right? If you tell people the best shooter not named Rick Mount, they're like, I don't know. I got to think about it. Steph Curry probably comes to mind because of the quick release, but just in terms of pure fundamental, right?
Yeah, I'm jumping up over people and stuff like that. But some people say, well, who do you think was the best shooter ever? Now, well, Jimmy Rail's going to say me. It's Jimmy Rail. Alfred's going to say him, and I'm going to say me. But I said that's why they make McDonald's and small little pubs and bars and barber shops and stuff, so everybody can go in and argue who was the best shooter to ever live. And that kind of but it was fun, and Purdue was a great place. And what I love about Purdue is their fans. They had great fans, and we had, we got beat by Iowa in the Big Ten my senior year, and I'd have to look it up, but we only lost 3 games in that place in 3 years, and we had a 33-game winning streak till Iowa beat us 1 point at the end of my senior year. And that's pretty good. And I had really good players with me, though. You got to remember that.
Rick, lastly, what's your plan for the game? I mean, are you going to be going out to Phoenix, or you going to just stay around so you can go to the barbershop and talk about it the day after for the Final Four? Rick Mount's Purdue plans on watching the Boilers is what?
Well, I'm going to get me an iced tea. I'm going to come in my office here, and I'm going to watch the game, sit in my easy chair.
That is good living right there, right?
Well, I don't have to mess with anybody, and people ask me, what do you think and stuff. I'm just sitting here and cuss a little bit and yell a little bit.
Absolutely beautiful. Rick, I'll tell you what, man, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. One of the great things about teams making runs is it allows us to then talk about other great players and great moments in the school's history, and you absolutely are a pillar amongst that, and with Indiana basketball as well.
Appreciate it, Jake.
Rick Mount, one of the all-time legends of Indiana basketball, and thanks again, by the way, to Mark Monteith, who facilitated that conversation. Mark will join us tomorrow on the program, along with Rick Mount's college teammate Billy Keller, going to join us tomorrow. Mitch Daniels, the former president emeritus of Purdue University, going to join us on the program tomorrow. Brad Miller as well. So we've got plenty to talk about as we are now right on the doorstep. Purdue is in Arizona. Connecticut got there, but it was after a ridiculous – did you see their flight issues? They didn't leave last night until, I think, 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah, Matt Norlander was all over that last night. It was very, very weird complications of, pilots having too many hours logged and all kinds of just bizarre stuff trying to get them out there.
Surprising that they just didn't have most big-time programs they just charter their own flight. But
yeah.
And maybe Connecticut does, and there was an issue with the pilot there. But we'll come back. We'll get Jimmy's picks and hand it off to John, who is live at Hinkle. We'll do it all next.
The college basketball tourney is here.
Jay Cook, plays of the day.
This is me, all right? I'm not a athlete. This is my way. This is how I win.
Today's plays of the day, a little mix of baseball, NBA, and college hoops. We'll start first with the association. We'll take the Philadelphia Sixers, 1 on the money line over the Miami Heat at a plus 110 right now. That game tipping off at 7:40 in Miami. In baseball, we'll take the Minnesota Twins to win on the money line over the Cleveland Guardians. And then tonight, give me the Sycamores to complete the championship season, hoisting the NIT trophy. And the dream, indeed. Take them outright over Seton Hall at Hinkle Fieldhouse, where JMV will be in just a few moments live from Hinkle. Eddie, any bets from you today?
Negatory.
No bets from Eddie, so those are your plays of the day. Indiana State outright, Twins outright in baseball, 76ers over the Heat outright in the NBA.
By the way, when do the Brewers finally have a loss, right? But I've already clinched that beer, essentially, between the Brewers, the Marlins, and the Guardians, right?
Yeah, no kidding. The Marlins can't win a game.
Didn't somebody have Tommy John surgery today?
Yep, their best pitcher just...
How perfect is it that Eddie's the baseball guy in the group, and he he gets the first pick of the teams, and he picks the team that's going to end up with the worst record in the majors.
I'm not going to laugh at you too much because I would have picked Miami.
They've blown 3 games, and the other 5 they just haven't scored enough runs.
Do you want to know my theory on baseball?
Of course.
Teams that, and I'm not like, whenever there's a team that has a surprise kind of, one of those like magical summers, it's never because, I mean, this is obviously you have to have this, but sure, you've got to have a staff that's pitching well. But usually teams like that, the Reds, the year that Jay Bruce hit the home run to get them to win the division, and, some of the Cardinals teams that got hot late, it's never the $35 million a year guy because he's hitting 345 with 35 home runs that carries you. Teams that lift surprisingly out of nowhere, usually the common theme is that they have 2 to 3 utility players that all simultaneously have a freak career year. When you get like your Craig Pauquettes and your, I don't know, insert name of just kind of random role player to all of a sudden go from being a 230 hitter to a year where they're hitting 285 and they hit timely home runs over the course of the year. Like, it's the middle pack guys you overlook that are the ones that can kind of lift you into the next level of where you thought you'd be. And that's why sometimes you see teams that have flash in pan years, because then those guys come back down to earth and you're right back to where you started from.
It's not the homers you hit, it's the friends you make along the way, Jake.
That's right. Ask Derek Whittenburg, right?
Exactly.
Thank you to Derek Whittenburg for joining us early on the program. That was a lot of fun, talking about the 83 championship game for North Carolina State over Houston. That was 41 years ago today. That is up on the Podcast Center on our website, 1075 The Fan. If you'd like to listen to Rick Mount for a third time, no problem. All of the Purdue podcasts are also right there on The Fan. And tomorrow we're going to add a lot to that, because we're going to have Mitch Daniels, as I mentioned tomorrow, Billy Keller. We got a whole show lined up tomorrow. Brad Miller going to be here, Mark Monteith. So a lot of Purdue talk. And listen, I've got a buddy that's a diehard IU fan. And he's like, Jake, I'm tired of hearing the Purdue stuff. And I said, I get it. But now you know what it's like to be a Purdue fan every other day of like the last 20 years, right? I mean, this is predominantly maybe an IU market, and Purdue has had to kind of wait their turn. Their turn is now, and they're going to get their due time, right? James just walked in, which means John's next. John's at Hinkle. James just left the barbershop. He's just got his hair. Oh, he's got his hair up in one of the, what do they call those things? A man bun? He's got his hair up in a man bun.
That's accurate, yeah.
He looks like one of the characters from one of those like fighting video games, doesn't he? I don't know which game. You guys are the gaming guys.
I mean, if you samurai'd it up, I suppose we could have some Mortal Kombat in here.
Mortal
if that's
Kombat,
what you're going
thank
for.
you. He looks like a character from Mortal Kombat. It is not going to be a mortal night for Indiana State tonight. They're going to lift themselves into immortality with an NIT title. John's live at Hinkle to talk about that and more next.
Go Trees.
If you're talking about it,